Green.
Are they?
They're in our presentation.
Oh, okay.
If we get to.
Are those from the comprehensive plan discussion? Oh, no, that's fine.
From the
Yeah,
from the master plan
I'll
discussion.
start with roll, so.
Oh, the staple meeting.
Oh, right, okay. You just tell me when.
Great.
You all are.
It's all the same thing. Do your screen.
Oh, you have hard copies. Oh, very good. Okay. I wanted people, if they were interested in this, to pester you for it, but no pestering needed then.
Ready to go?
Take one, pass it down, and just leave the extras at the end of the table now.
Okay, good evening. I'd like to call the Parks and Recreation Commission to order for the February 23rd, 2016. And if Catherine would please take the roll.
Commissioner Hedderly.
Here.
Commissioner Rectal.
Here.
Commissioner Cowie. Commissioner Lowing.
Here.
Commissioner Cribbs. Commissioner Knopper.
Here.
Commissioner Moss.
Here.
Council Philseth.
He's expected.
Yes, I know.
Okay, are there any agenda changes, requests, deletions, batting orders? Anything like that? Okay, then oral communications, maybe the public can address this body on any issue not necessarily related to the agenda. So far I have one speaker card. Okay. David Carnahan.
Thank you, Chair Lowing and Commissioners. As you know, when you see me here, it means the city is conducting a recruitment for boards and commissions. This spring, we're looking to fill commission roles on 3 different commissions. These are great opportunities for members of the community to give back and give their expertise to share and make Palo Alto an even better place than it already is. Right now, we're looking to fill 2 positions on the Human Relations Commission, 2 positions on the Library Advisory Commission, and 3 on the Utilities Advisory Commission. All of these are 3-year terms that will end on May 31st, 2019. Applications are due March 18th at 5 p.m. to the City Clerk's office, or they can be emailed to me. We have flyers and applications in the chambers. There's a couple specific membership requirements on the different committee or commissions. For the Human Relations Commission, you just need to be a Palo Alto resident. Library Advisory Commission, a Palo Alto resident, and you must show a demonstrated interest in public library matters. Don't really know what that means, but I would anticipate that applying to serve on the commission almost would fill that role. And then Utilities Advisory Commissioners, 6 of them must be Palo Alto residents, and all of them must be either utilities customers or authorized representatives of a utilities customer. So the reason I come and speak at board and commission meetings is because commissioners and members of the public that attend, you all are so much more deeply connected to the community than the clerk's office. So we really hope that you can spread the word through the community to people you know that would be good for these roles. So again, it's 2 terms on the Human Relations Commission, 2 on the Library Advisory Commission, and 3 on the Utilities Advisory Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Just confirming our AV here, all the mics are on all the time? Is that correct? Okay, thanks.
I think you just turned yourself, actually.
I just moved it.
The red button, is it on? There you go.
Yes, please speak into the microphones, but treat them at all times.
Okay. Okay, thank you. We have 2 sets of minutes to take a look at. The draft minutes from the January 26th meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to that set of minutes? Even though they're verbatim minutes, sometimes they pick up some funny words. So on page 27 of these minutes, just so there's no misunderstanding, my comment on line 23 is it's just giving a hint that this one is expensive, not any sort of mafia hit on things that are expensive. So that was the only one I found. I'm looking at the second set of minutes, which is the draft minutes of the February 5th special retreat meeting.
Did we approve the first one, though?
Oh, sorry. There weren't any other changes. All in favor of approval? Aye?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you. And then the special retreat minutes, were there any comments on those?
I have some comments on those.
Okay.
thought they were a little bit weird since they were sort of a mix between random verbatim pieces and summary pieces. It was a little hard to follow. They didn't capture the roundup of top priorities that we started off the meeting with. And there was no coverage of the master plan discussion at the end of the meeting. And Commissioner Lowing should be added to the CIP ad hoc on the final page. I don't have a hard copy, so I can't point you to the right place. And just, those are my only comments about it. I don't know that we're going back to try to change it. I know we didn't have verbatim minutes for that meeting, but.
Right.
It strikes, I didn't look at them closely, I have to admit, but it seems like they're pretty subject to things that are not in there, but maybe we need to come back to the next month with those revisions.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay.
On one of those comments, though, I believe that I actually rolled off the CIP committee, so
Oh, you
I should
did?
actually be deleted in the chart.
Okay, so it has you in one and it doesn't have you in the next
Yeah,
one.
yeah, but I rolled off. I don't recall, however, if anyone rolled on.
Yeah, I think when the time comes, we'll have to twist arms and get someone on there.
Okay. And then Darren's not here tonight, but one other question that I had was on line 124. In his, it looked like it was a quotation, so if it's a quotation, it's a quotation. But he made a comment that off-leash options failed to gather much support from the community, which I'm not sure is quite true, or the commission, which I'm also not sure is quite true. So I just want to make sure it was true to what he was quoting. So maybe we should check that with him since we're going to revise the minutes anyway.
Sure.
And I think it's shared use everywhere. Sometimes it says share use, and sometimes it says shared use on the dog park stuff. But we won't approve those. We'll have those come back at the next meeting.
And just related to that, a note to the chair, next time Commissioner Cribbs is able to attend, we should revisit the ad hoc and give her an opportunity.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, the next item on the meeting, Kristen is going to introduce the new executive director of Project Safety Net. And have a little.
Actually, Rob is going to.
Rob, congratulations.
Yeah, you're going to sit right here, Mary, so come on up. Hopefully I'm close enough to the mic. Is that okay? All right. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mary Gloner right here as the new PSN Project Safety Net Executive Director. She's been here a month. Is that right? About a month. We did an extensive search, and we had interviews with many community members, with Dr. Max McGee, City Manager Jim Payne, alumni students and current students, and we really put her through quite the process. And she emerged as the candidate, and I have to say, just thrilled. It's such an important topic and collaborative, and we need someone of Mary's caliber, so we're just really thrilled to have her. She has a master's degree in health education, and she has an MBA as well, so she's super organized, and she has a great sense of humor, but she's also tenacious and wants to really make a difference in the world. So just thrilled to have her here, and she's going to do a short little presentation to give you a sense of what's going to happen with Project Safety Net this year.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners, for having me here. Hopefully, you're quite familiar with Project Safety Net already, and this will be your opportunity to see if I learned really well this past month. So just to get us all on the same page, it's always a good reminder to know what our mission is. And as you all know, this was first launched in response to the first clusters of youth suicides back in 2009. If you want to learn more what has happened since then, there's our website. And I know I'll be, Kristen will be able to share these slides with the commission. Okay. So it's to develop and implement an effective, comprehensive, community-based mental health plan for overall youth well-being in Palo Alto. And frankly, that's been happening. It's just the people who have been, what I've learned and I've seen as I was preparing to embark in this position, and what I discovered in the past month, it's happening on the ground. It's just where we are is wanting to do a better role in coordinating that and so forth, and I'll share a little bit. So as I have shared with the members, people I've talked to, the youth and so forth, even though youth suicide is not one of the number one health issues in our community, but it's because it's so emotionally charged, just one death is just too much. So what I hope to do in the next, my time with you, I don't think it'll take the full 30 minutes, probably will be, most of it will be your questions or any comments. It's just a month in review, kind of remind all of us what our focus, and I say ours, the collaborative focus for the first year. Do a collective impact 101, because that's really the work that we need to do has to be within a framework and focus to really help us meet, kind of reach our mission. And then just some closing. So a lot of my past month has been, like all of us who transition to new roles, is about learning, networking, and acting. So in the learning role, getting in part of that new employment orientation that Palo Alto has launched, which I think is a nice model that other government organizations would hopefully implement. And most importantly, orientation from Rob and Minka van der Schwag, who were really key to keeping the momentum of the collaborative during the transition of executive directors. So, and then also doing some training. I had my first formal training actually just an hour ago with the QPR, question, persuading, and refer. So I found it a nice, accessible training for the community at large. It doesn't matter your expertise in mental health, just to get really comfort with the topic, and just being able to access the language. Then Project Safety Net leadership team, and even though there have been team members, leadership has been transitioned out, I will continue to network, and that's the second part. But what they've been primarily been sharing with me is a lot of the institutional knowledge, sort of their hopes and aspirations from their specific expertise, and really sharing not only the rewards but the challenges, which is being part of a small, tight-knit community like Palo Alto. I kind of use the analogy of a family. There's no room for hiding, and which is important for this issue. And I, as I've shared with Rob, I said, if there's silence or complacency, that's where I would worry. So it's important to, even if it might be discourses, I always feel is very important in this type of work, especially working with youth. And then networking. So this is part of this also. But pretty much have been meeting, like I said, community members who've been part of youth suicide prevention as well as youth well-being. And just also starting to explore with other city departments, especially we're fortunate, we're all kind of like in the same department, community service, so it makes collaboration and easier about how do we engage youth and the services so that the youth feel that there's not redundancy, but they're actually being heard. And then finally, what you probably saw a lot in the media is acting. One big thing is the EPI-8 investigation and really partnering closely with the Santa Clara County Public Health Department, but really it's with the school district, it's with the city of Palo Alto, it's with leadership, who also includes some of the community members, and making sure that this EPI-8 investigation is our investigation. It's really helping us to really understand better some of why is youth suicide such the cluster issue happening here, and really it's about strengthening our programs and really focusing on how I see it as being a leader for other cities and communities that may not have the capacity or resources or just such engagement.
What is that? What is
Oh, the
that?
FBA, okay, so thank you, it's good. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have come to our community through our invitation after the second cluster of youth suicides occurred in 2014-15, and when the school district and City of Palo Alto and Project Safety Net leaders had a discussion that said that and discovered when the CDC went to Fairfax County, Virginia, to do a study there to understand their youth suicides, they thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to do it here as well. And so that call went out in March, and then in around winter, around the same time I was being interviewed, it was part of the conversation, the planning had started. And then in January, we were all working on coordinating. So the CDC, just about, and along with the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, so, it's another arm in our federal government that focuses on that issue. There's 5 members who are here reviewing data that's collected through the county as well as through the school district and city. And then in the evenings and as well as the weekends, they're having community meetings with various key individuals and organizations that that intimately work with youth suicide prevention or youth well-being or know it firsthand. And these community meetings have been organized with City of Palo Alto, with the school district, the Santa Clara County's Behavioral Health Department, as well as Project Safety Net. And then, there's been a lot of press on that, and so that was one way to just throw me in, huh? But
They sure did.
Yeah, but it was. I feel that, like again, if the work that I've done in other communities and so forth, really, I felt prepared me for this. And I like I keep saying, and it just might seem like cheesy and cliche, I do feel at home. And I feel I'm blessed and honored that I was selected, and I just want to continue to do that work for for the community. Second is administration. So, working with personnel, budget, all that. And then we're also going to have a new center, so dealing. It's about maybe this size. So there's a actual physical home. So as a side commentary, having been in nonprofit for like 20 years, I feel such a luxury and blessed with all these resources that really help us can do our important mission work. And as you know, if you serve also on nonprofit boards, sometimes resources sometimes get in the way of getting into doing that. And then more importantly, it's the year 1 work plan development, and I'll go into that. But any questions about the month in review?
I'll just add,
Yeah.
Mary, the FBA epidemiology study
Mhm.
the CDC is doing with the county is really important. It's really important work that's happening, and what we hope we'll get from that is a report that with recommendations that will affirm, support, or give us sharper focus on the prevention and intervention work that we're doing as a community, as a city, and as a school, and as parents. They're fairly in-depth studies and have significant outcomes that we hope will help with our work. And there'll be an initial report, and we'll get a couple of months after they leave, and then a more extensive report approximately a year later or within the year.
How long are they here?
You're here for 2 weeks, and this is the second week, and they have, I think, as Mary said, 8 different, I think it's 8
total.
community meetings with people that are working in the field. So they have a meeting with mental health professionals, meeting with school district staff, city representatives, and a variety of others.
Any more questions? There'll still be a lot of more time if you want to backtrack. Okay. So here's 5 primary focus for this next year. So there's already a leadership, but it's really to establish it more formally. And that's all part of looking at really the infrastructure and strengthening it. So as I had shared when I was being interviewed and in conversations, the Project Safety Net came in response and in reaction, but then they realized that, youth well-being is a lifelong process, and that this is something maybe we need to continue as a collaborative. But in light of how there continues to be, or as the work continued, there was a clear understanding that this is something that needs to be sort of having sort of, like I would say, a bricks and mortar, really having it more established and structured. And that was something that the collaborative as a whole all agreed upon. So I'm really coming in and helping facilitate and forward a vision that the various leaders have already, and community members had demanded as well as advised on. The third one, and this is a primer for us in community health education, we always say start with the community. And it's not the community geographically, but in this case, the community would be the youth. And yes, many of the leaders and organizations are wonderful proxies. Their heart is in a good place, but it can never take the place of really understanding and listening and engaging the youth to be part of the solution. And so they've been actively involved, but I think this is also an opportunity when you go through change management to really practice what you preach. So. And then, so as I mentioned, a fourth component is after a year developing some recommendation, really evaluating its project safety net. What does it take to be its own standalone nonprofit, or is it going to be best suited for the community to be nested in another organization? And how to do that is really through this collective impact model, which I will share a little bit more. And it's really developing that roadmap, whether you call it roadmap, strategic plan, logic model. It's really helping us, guide us. And as I had shared with Rob and others, it's like all the planning activities that's been done and forth, it's there, and maybe it just required having a fresh set of eyes to help moving it forward, because I was really impressed of all the sort of the visionary and what kind of structure and how to mobilize all the different work. Yes, there's still gaps, but by using the collective impact model, it can sort of, and hopefully with the CDC EPI-Aid report, can really give us some tools to make it really clear what are we doing and what needs to be available for the community at the individual level, at the group level, which is whether it's the family or amongst peers, at the community level, or even at policy. And that's really what I also said I hope to bring in, is bringing that public health perspective. So even though it's like looking at mental health, any critical health issue, in order to be sustainable, successful, and really to address it for the long term, you need to look at it at multiple levels with multiple partners and disciplines. Any questions about the focus? Okay.
Yeah, I've got a
question. Yes, sir.
On the first one there, in terms of establishing the executive board, what work is there to be done at this point? Additions or deletions, or?
I'm going to add a little bit here, and this Mary's still really new, and so we're still working on some stuff there. But and the council's heard about this. We've talked about this at council meetings and policy and services. But the idea is to have a higher level executive board of some of the really senior staff, even CEO level staff from Lucille Packard Children's Hospital, Palo Medical Foundation, the school district, the city, maybe even Sutter Health and a couple of others, to support the Project Safety Net work and be a sort of a guiding voice. Not that they would meet monthly, but they would meet a couple of times a year and give direction on sort of the high-level vision and initiatives that we're pursuing. And in addition to that, the hope is that they would also contribute to supporting the collaborative. Up until now, the City of Palo Alto has been really the backbone agency that's provided the financial support to have someone like Mary to work with the collaborative partners to keep them together and collaborating, which is a lot of work. It's not going to happen. It doesn't happen on its own. But if we think and we hope those bigger institutions will believe in this, what we're doing, and will want to contribute and support it. So it's another level of leadership in addition to the leadership team that's sort of more on the ground supporting the work.
Yeah, the analogy would be like a typical nonprofit. You have your board of directors who deal with governance and pretty much are the fundraisers for that organization. And then you have your secondary, which can sometimes be advisory and so forth. But the name of the title can be switched. But that it's really moving towards a structure that kind of models a typical nonprofit of how they run and actually sustain. So it's not going to take I think the way that the collective impact, I believe, will actually make it more participatory, and especially in a small community like Palo Alto, an opportunity for anyone to engage at different levels.
I have a question about the youth voice.
Mm-hmm.
How active are the youth in the Project Safety Net? Quite often peers have more influence on teenagers than adults do.
So and then Rob could share a little bit more history, but in the last month, the whole process, they were engaged in actually recruiting. They were part of the interview panel. They were actually at the end, which is nice because it's sort of like, it's like the way I saw it and the way you guys present it, it's sort of like they're the final endorsement, And that's a lot of symbolism there.
And they're helping drive what the Project Safety Net does?
At this time, I'm still researching and to see how much engagement, involvement, but I do know from in my experience so far, they were at the collaborative meetings. They, in regards to this, the CDC EpiAid, we're all working to try to engage youth and making sure their input is given, but not in a way that's redundant, where they could say, well, we've shared that. So we're going to be working with them as well. I do know they work very closely more in the front line and really addressing and raising awareness about mental health issues, how to promote peer, and that gets filtered up. But if you're asking if like shaping the strategic direction and vision, that's something I'm still needed to research on. Okay. So here's the, how many of you have heard about the Collective Impact 101 outside of City of Palo Alto or Project Safety Net, or have you? Okay, so just a little bit of history, and this was also part, it was a learning. It was first founded, first reported by a couple of individuals from FSG. That group is a consulting group based in Boston, Massachusetts. It stands for Foundation Strategy Group. And this was actually one of the individual was a leader in philanthropy, and the other one was a leader in management consulting, being at Harvard. But these two authors, were one of the leaders within FSG, because FSG was founded like in 2000, so that's almost 16 years ago. And now they're in an international consulting firm, but really looking at social capacity building, really how to, I think they support a lot of early days like philanthropy and driving, foundation initiatives. And so in 2011, Kanya and Kramer identified what makes it a collaborative or partnership successful. And since then, they've this model, collective impact, has been used in rallying around issues such as poverty, homelessness, but also like diabetes and obesity and so forth. So there are 5 core areas, and it does seem very intuitive. So one is having a common agenda. As you know, every individual organization have different agendas or backgrounds, but it's important to have a shared understanding. Everything's about shared, and really not only understanding the agenda, but how to solve these issues that are identified, and coming to an agreement. So it sometimes can be takes time, especially when issues are so emotionally charged, like suicide. It's not patience. But if people put their eye out on the long term, then this is really strong. This is really valuable in capacity building, because sometimes what I've seen in the nonprofit world, if you also served in boards or volunteered, it's like we get so caught up in the reactionary, and then the same issues keep happening and challenges. So I think that's one core component. The second one is about shared measurement. So it's not just simply, okay, we should all just put our data together in some repository, but it's really agreeing on what kind of data we need to collect and who's collecting in a way that's helping define what kind of alignment is with the mission, but also that it keeps people accountable to one another. So I always looked at, and I learned that data is an empowering rather than a punitive, and I think it's just messaging. especially when it's participatory. And it doesn't seem it's like an upper echelon that, oh, only if you have a PhD or you're a biostatistician. And in the work I've done is like taking that information to the community so that they feel powered and be able to articulate and use it. Next one is about mutually reinforcing activities, kind of similar. It's like how do we interact at an individual level, interventions that might focus on the youth or maybe the parent, or how about interventions that look at the family or peer groups or at the community. We're looking at schools or outside of school services, or and even looking at policies that maybe the school boards or the city of Palo Alto or the funders. So this one also is challenging too, because it's like there's so many activities can be done, but I think the key with the collective impact is not about having a whole inventory, but being very strategic and identifying those core buckets. Continuous communication, another word would be like transparency, especially in a sensitive issue, making sure that it doesn't seem the appearance that one group or organization or individual has more information than the other. And it's really the other part of continuous communication is that having that power that can be frank and have candor and have space to voice. And I think this is where raising youth voice will be critical. And then finally, thanks to City of Palo Alto, because they believed that this issue was so important that they said they're going to invest. But as you know, this is a multi-sector issue, and there really needs to be investment in all parts. It's kind of like if you took a training class, even though it's free, but if you give $1, you sort of feel committed to take that class because you invested in and you don't take it for granted. So, but the backbone support is really making sure you have staff and specific skills so that the work that the collaborative is doing is supportive towards that vision. And as you know, being on a commission, you guys are all volunteer, but without the administrative staff, can you imagine you all have to take the minutes and, try to coordinate everyone. And sometimes we take that for granted, but that helps you to effectively use your time to make the high-powered decisions. So any questions about Collective Impact 101?
I mean, one of the things that strikes me about this is there's a lot of agreement. Almost every bullet has something about collaboration or agreement. And I can see that this is very good in that if you can't agree on the basics, you're not going to agree on the actions.
Correct.
And the first thing you have to do before you even talk about actions is get the ground rules set.
Yes.
So this looks like a good step.
Yeah, and I've always learned that it's important to have that framework, and so and I like to learn too. So I will be frank, I had not heard about collective impact, but again, I was more in the front line, and I realized whether you call it collective impact, community organizing, health belief model, they all have similar components, and it's all about achieving towards that vision. What's nice about this one? This is really about focusing. It's about interrelations and achieving your mission and goal. Any other comments? Okay. So for closing, thank you for planning a place for us. So because the public health person in me too says that if there isn't a place that people can feel safe to walk and exercise, then that's also a challenge and that impacts health. But if you ever want to kind of broaden your horizons and want to learn more about Project Safety Net, we do have monthly collaborative meetings. Our next one is actually tomorrow, right before the State of the City. So if you plan to go there, if you want to come a little bit early, you can jump in, be a little bit intimate. Otherwise, and that's your opportunity to kind of see some of what you want to do is highlight some of the youth programs, highlight some of the partners who are doing this work, get a little bit update of what we're doing collaboratively. There'll be the CDC, FBA, there'll be someone from Santa Clara County Public Health Department, and just networking. So that's if you ever have the opportunity. And then, and it's in the Mitchell Park, which is one of the, I believe you guys approved that, right? Yeah, did, yeah. So thank you for that. I remember when I was a little kid, when we would go to Mitchell Park, I was like, wow, this place is so beautiful now. Before I was just like, brown. Okay, and then other ones, I know you're having understanding commission of myself. he really focuses on policies and setting and advising the city council. So one of my asks and hope is that when you are looking at your master plans or when any other policy issue comes, if you could think about how this will benefit the youth in addressing their youth well-being, because you may not realize it directly, like, oh, how's this suicide prevention? But it's the focus is that if a happy youth, happy family, happy adult, it just can't help but have positive outcomes. So. And I don't know, maybe that was a sign that says your time is over. Okay? And then, I do want to acknowledge, which is important, I really wanted to acknowledge Rob and Brenda. Let's see if this will do this. There we go. Oh, maybe it's just unplugged. Oh, wow. I'll just verbalize it. So just so you can understand a little bit about the Project Safety Net, certainly there's the leadership, but Rob representing the city of Palo Alto because they're a key partner, and then Brenda Carrillo, who's with the Palo Alto Unified School District, are co-chairs. And then also there's Tanya Shornak, who's our specialist, and myself. So you can see how small, but because that's, the most of the work is with the community. And then Minka, even though she's transitioning out so she can address other important issues like homelessness and child care and so forth, she's my Informa advisor, and she's helped me with the transition because she knows this intimately. And then, of course, Kristen helped me get all organized and coordinated so I could have space and time to educate you on Project Safety Net and kind of get to learn a little bit about me. That's
Very
it.
Good. Thank you, Mary.
And then there's my contact information in it too, but you'll get it. You'll get that later on. So.
Questions?
So I see then that we're going to be able to help you most in some of the mutual reinforced activities and also some of the backbone support. And as far as engaging youth in healthy ways, in the parks you have the sports and you have the after-school programs and you have the camps, summer camps, and you have the community/family events. I'd love to see more of those. And you have open space and nature, which kids should be using more.
Yeah.
So if there's any way that we can, help to expand those programs, or at least don't let them deteriorate, because there are more kids and more people than ever before in the city. So we have to make sure that what we have will not deteriorate. So is there anything else that you want us to focus on?
I think just knowing and having that awareness, because really your role is to advise the city council. You're appointed by the council to represent the constituents of your respective districts in addressing this stuff. So I see it's a partnership that through your leadership to make sure, not to forget the other populations, but of course I'm here on behalf of Project Safety Net. If you're mindful about how this will impact the youth and their well-being in whatever decisions you make. And also sometimes if you're proactively thinking about developing a new policy or if the committee presents a policy, just having youth well-being in your back, I feel that's an accomplishment in itself.
Okay. Thank you very much. You're going to be busy.
I have one last question. I'm not sure this is for Rob or for you. The Teen Center, how is that in Project Safety Net? Is there any interaction between those two?
Yeah, we often meet at Mitchell Park is one thing. We have a teen advisory group that meets there and the Palo Alto Youth Council, and so they're involved in Project Safety Net and help advise some of the direction of Project Safety Net. We have the Teen Center is interesting because in the past it's always been occupied mostly by middle school students, and now we have a little additional funding and we're doing more late evening activities just for high school students. So we have Friday nights at the Drop, it's called, and then some Saturday time and Sunday time too. And it's starting to get momentum, so we get more and more teens participating, which is really great. And Lacey Crawson runs that community center, and Amel Aziz is the teen coordinator, and Mary's getting to know those staff and the students that are there. So we're building that program. We're a year in right now.
And that's one of my the priorities is to meet with Lacey and Amal to find out how we can have more synergy. And because you already have a capture audience of engaged youth, and my understanding is like when the youth of this community says, I want to go and congregate somewhere, right away it's Mitchell Park Community Center, you know. So, and it's not only, I believe it's not only youth who go to the schools here, it's the youth who live here. So, then, you know, they go to schools other places as well. So that's one of my like really itching to do. I want to sit down and see how we can support, because they're working already with that youth and just finding a way to say that there's another opportunity for them.
I just had a quick comment about the youth voice. I think also that's hugely important. And I'm curious how the Project Safety Net manages the separation between the youth leaders, the Teen Advisory Committee, the Youth Council, who are really engaged and active, who maybe don't have relationships with the rest of the kids.
Right.
And how can you help them bridge that gap in representing the voices of the whole student community? I think that's something that's important to figure out. Maybe you've already figured out and you're doing it, but
you raising that point is very important. You're not the only one who's identified that. I did see a model. I see hope. I always look at hope and possibilities. When I learned about, I asked, so how did they recruited for the student panel? And of course, there were actually alums as well, some of the youths who were here during the clusters and who are still engaged. There were some student leaders, but there were, because I asked, I go, so what brought you here at the table? And there were some who said, oh, I heard there's going to be interviewed, and I was just curious to find out who this person was going to be. So that shows me hope that there's people who want, and they felt safe, or that they were like, okay, it's okay for me to show up. And I think that was the individual who got also interviewed for that, like, I still have a challenge with it, but the article that just got released.
Right.
So I don't know, but I don't know, do you want to share a little bit more about how they were recruited to?
I just generally with the trying to hear youth voice, you know, there's 4,000 high school students or something, and that doesn't even include the private schools. I think as we've talked about it, is try and create as many opportunities and in as many different ways for teens to be able to speak their voice, whether it's through the arts or through some of these teen leadership groups or other club programs. Some of the programs happening at the school are really interesting. One is called Sources of Strength, which looks at teen leaders in different parts of the community on school campus. So you've got the sports people, the dance people, all the different, and they have formed, with the support of Dr. Joshi and others with Project Safety Net, a club called Sources of Strength, and these bridge teens that then connect with other teens, and it's all about hope and resiliency and these types of things. But the main answer to that is, I think we definitely do this at the Teen Center, is just create lots of opportunity to bring teens in under different circumstances, under different interests, and create authentic relationships with them, so we can hear what they're thinking.
It's a challenge, but then I also say it's less of a challenge if this was a bigger geographic region. And like I said, it's like just finding the different avenues, because you're right, most of the people who actively engage have no problem. It's the one who don't have socialized groups. So maybe, but it's also talking to them and not making suppositions. So that's one of the questions I want to learn more about. How can we engage you more directly from them, the youth?
One thing we've definitely learned is you can't try and create a group that's representative of all the different interests, because the kids don't want to go. I mean, so the Teen Arts Council, they want to be Teen Arts Council, and they want to be at the theater, and that's where they. So we have to go to them, and we have to go to that place and talk to those kids, and the Rock kids or the Palo Youth Council, a whole different set of kids, and so we've tried that before. So let's have a really diverse group of teens that's represent. It just doesn't. it doesn't work that way. And so realizing that is an important thing, so we've got to get out, and we do get out, and we just try to reach kids in many different ways.
And then through the collaborative, those organizations and individuals, by proxy, they're that connection to the youth too. But it's not going to take the same as if we heard from them directly.
Yeah, I think that's an important point there, Mary, that so when we do meet, and they are adults, but they're adults that are working directly with youth. So we have the leaders of adolescent counseling services that are on campus that are talking to teens all the time. And they're informing the rest of us about what they're hearing, and that helps us do better at the teen center, or it helps the Y do better. And the Y has this mentoring program for at-risk youth. Well, that individual is part of the Project Safety Network, and he comes with perspective that he's heard directly from the youth. So I don't think that we can just rely on that and not also just have the teams there. And but that is an important part of it, a part of understanding what's happening with teens. Like and Mary, one of the first things she sort of instituted was, what was it called? What do we call it? Youth in Action.
Yeah, Youth in Action.
At every Project Safety meeting, so that and it's not adults sharing what teens are doing, but it's teens actually up there presenting. What was the one that did last month? It was decrease the stigma around.
Yeah, it was like something like it was funded by Glenn Close. I can't remember,
Glenn
but
Close, right.
it's looking like just being more comfortable talking about mental health.
Yeah, Be the Change. They did a
Oh yeah, the
job.
change. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So we can send you some links to the EPI study, because we have a page on the Project Safety Net website. Yeah, so you can read about that and collective impact if you're interested in more about that particular model.
That's the Project Safety Net's website.
Yeah.
Yeah, so go to that website, and if you can't find it, then you'll have my contact information. So did you take too much already of your time? Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Mary.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Same here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is an update on parks, trails, open space, and recreation facilities master plan. I think Peter's going to lead that with a lot of collaboration from others.
Yeah, that's a huge collaborative effort for
Right.
sure. We had a fantastic PowerPoint prepared for you all, and then all of a sudden...
Sure.
it's not working.
We have to use your hands and like shadow cut.
Yeah, so we might have to look at the paperwork. Just a thank you to the staff, Kristen, Peter, outstanding, and Darren, continuing to move us along. And so Darius is going to lead the presentation today. I know we had a couple of community meetings, but community meetings, stakeholder meetings.
Yeah, I was going to ask for a commentary on that.
Yeah, so-
Can that come in at first?
Sure. So we had 2 meetings this month. One was a community meeting on February 11th, and the purpose of that meeting was to go through a process.
Oh, thank you.
Pause for just a second so she
Sure.
can try and fix it.
Oh, okay.
Doing a technical pause.
You have your map. We have our maps down here, so we don't need to.
Yeah, I'll wait for you.
I guess we should put them in the table.
Oh, it's only two.
We're on break.
Yeah.
They passed out yours. You were there. You got all 3?
Did you have all 3?
I put it at the end of the table.
Got it?
Yep. Kristen, did you want copies?
Sure, because I only got one. It's okay.
She deserves a map, right? She deserves a map at least.
Gary, do you want copies? Thank you. Okay.
That is another, we have to change the
Since which meeting?
Do you want copies?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, something's wrong.
It is not.
It's got a shoulder or something. It's gonna pop up there for a second.
Wonderful map.
Yeah. Eric, did you want copies of maps?
Shawnee, on this, no, this is for this
Yeah.
item. Would you like to go before you hear the presentation or after?
It's the HDMI
You
cord.
want to have
Another HDMI cord I might have.
Sorry, after?
Yeah.
Okay,
What about this one?
okay.
No, it's not.
How come they have table 2 and table 1?
Well, I think that there's one down there at that end, but I can't figure out where the cord is actually at.
But that's input 2, isn't it?
Here you go. Did you grab this cable?
Do you want me to move all the way down so that he and I share this mic? Would that be better? If everybody moved down?
Well, we actually have, there's actually 2 here.
I know, and they have none.
Yeah.
They have one.
I have one, but Eric has none.
Oh, yeah.
Got it?
Rob,
This part is kind of stuck.
Oh, yeah.
John always pushed together. You're not gonna skirt, no worries. Yeah, I think that sounds good. Yeah. So during the community, when he was running, his sisters, how teas properly, teas.
Here we come.
And I did you
Whoa.
He's women into it.
What was the key to victory there?
Turn the middle one on. Hit the bottom button in the middle. There it is.
And then that one over there, is there another button?
Yes, there is.
I do. That's how I vote, because I don't know. Yeah.
It's kind of strange.
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
like
The only place they don't have one, we need
Is
it.
we're all looking.
For us.
This room does not get an A+ for design, I gotta tell you.
Yes, we've talked about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. This chair is crippling me. That's why I'm leaving.
All right, I think we're ready.
All back.
Okay, are we ready?
Okay, let's relaunch.
Do-over.
Okay, go.
Okay, so I'm going to give just a brief summary of the 2 meetings we had. The first was February 11th. That was a community meeting, and the purpose of that was to go through the same process that the prioritization challenge went through online, the challenge survey. I have to admit that we did not have a large turnout. We had about 5 people from the community attend. We think that's probably a result of the people that were going to do the survey already did it. We did get over 700 respondents to the survey, people who filled out the survey in its entirety. We still went through and I think had a really good discussion and went through a ranking process. But we did have a second meeting on last Thursday, February 18th, and that's a stakeholder meeting. And we had a really good turnout for the stakeholder meeting, really good discussion. They received a presentation similar to the one you're receiving tonight. And we received some really good feedback. And I also want to thank Commissioners Moss and Rectal for attending that meeting as well.
About how many people were at that one?
Would you say 16?
16 came.
16.
The stakeholder group's 22 people, so I email about 40 people because there's usually 2 or 3 people that represent each group. So most of them, the groups are represented at the meeting, which has been, for our stakeholder group, has been the norm for the 2 meetings before. So
Great.
They're definitely really engaged in the process and do provide a lot of good feedback in that respect. I would say too that the community meeting was interesting, even though there was 5 people there. It was a microcosm of our conversations for the Parks Master Plan. There was a sports field representative there, a dog park representative there. We discussed restrooms. We discussed community gardens. So we hit all the key topics that we discuss pretty much every time with this. So it was an interesting conversation, and because the reps of those were there, they basically got to hear each other's pros and cons against the other ones, which I thought was good for the fields and the dog use. To have the conversation and hear what the other ones had to say. So even though it was a low turnout, I think that it was a constructive conversation. I do wish there was more there. We did sent it out. I would say a minimum of 15,000 people got the notice of the meeting. So I know when it goes out to our
That's great.
CSD list that it's
Yeah.
a list of 12,000, and then I also send it to every neighborhood association rep to send out, as well as the stakeholders to send out. So I can't judge on how many they send out, but I'm sure it was another few thousand people roughly. So unfortunately, but we did get 731 responses, which was very good. The interesting part about the responses in that respect is that it appears that when someone started to do the survey, that they actually went from the beginning to the end. There was very few that they just started and did like the first section and then stopped. So most of the 731 responses, well, those were all full responses, and then there were 100 or so that had started and didn't get to the end. But everyone pretty much that did start to do it did the whole thing. So that was a promising. We do have a lot to discuss tonight, so we will get into that because the conversation, there are a few things to discuss. Going through our normal slides, we always look at this one just for the planned purpose, and that's to just guide decision-making for future development of parks, trails, natural open spaces, and recreation system. That's why we're trying to put the master plan together. What we're going to look at tonight is, and that's interesting that there's a double one at the beginning, but we're going to first look at defining the project terminology and look at definitions, basically coming to that hierarchy of the master plan itself, and have a discussion about that. We're going to review the proposed draft goals, and there's been some revisions to that. We're going to review some we're going to have a discussion and talk about some key policy questions that are still unresolved and go through those. And we can also talk about other policies as we go through that. The list of policies, though, is fairly long, so in terms of timing goes, we want to focus on the ones that we have, and then we can have a further discussion on that. I would say that for the policies and the goals that we do want to continue the discussion, so we're not here to decide on what they are tonight. We're here to continue the discussion of what those are and continue to build and revise as necessary. And then if we have some time permitting, we will look at some concept maps, which I did pass out earlier, that we started to pass out, and the survey preliminary results of the actual online survey, which are really preliminary because it just closed a few days ago. So these are just basically the raw data numbers of how many people, and then starting to rank which ones came out higher and which ones lower. So hopefully we get to that point. So to start our conversation off tonight, and you do have a printout of this, so if it's hard to see up there, hopefully it's a little bit easier to see on the paper that was handed out, but is the definitions of the principles, goals, policies, projects, and programs. So I think there was a request by the ad hoc and members of the commission to better define these terms, so we all have a better understanding and grasp of what they mean. So the project team basically has started to put some of those together. I believe the policy definition was in your package as far as the attachment B goes that went through the policies, but the principles, goals, project, and programs are new. So basically we're kind of rebuilding these definitions tonight, and then hopefully taking some comment and questions about them. Of course, when we start with the framework itself, we start with the principles, and the definition attached to that is the fundamental basis that describes a desired state or preferred direction. Collectively, the principles articulate Palo Alto community's vision for future parks, trails, natural open space, and recreation system. The second one, the goals, is a broad statement of direction describing the desired end state. Goals are qualitative in nature and collectively should be achieved the system envisioned by the principles. That leads us then to the policies, which we're working on, which is a course of action that provides clear guidance regarding recreation program provisions, park maintenance and operations, or future renovations and capital improvement needs for parks, trails, open space, and recreation facilities. The definition for our projects is a capital improvement or study related to future capital improvements, and for programs and action or initiative related to service provision. So that we set that up tonight to have a conversation about that, so we're all on the same page of what these areas mean, so we have a clear understanding as we go forward and build the framework of this master plan. So we can open that up to discussion. I don't know, Rob, if you have anything else you want to fill in on that?
I think it's important. I think it probably still could be tweaked a little further, so I'm curious, interested to hear the Commission's feedback. I think it goes from sort of the highest level to more and more specific is the basic concept. So, yeah, we should pause here, I think.
Yeah, so I just want to get kind of an overall sort of direction with what I think the ad hoc has commented on, and that's 3 of the 5 here tonight, so bring on the other 2, but it's sort of what we would like to get out of it with respect to the policy discussion. So first, as was stated by Rob at the beginning of the retreat, and Mary about 4 times tonight, so she's well trained, which is that, you know, our job here is to advise council on policy. And you said that at the retreat. It's all about policy. So that's the crucial thing. And therefore, you know, I think we want to leave here with a pretty clear understanding, as you're starting with here, of what's a policy. You know, what is that? So that as we're doing any kind of work, we know, you know, what's kind of inbounds and out of bounds. Secondly, keep in mind the reason that we requested this, I guess, to be a little bit accelerated from when you were going to work on it, was because we felt pretty strongly that that's essential to being able to do prioritization, scoring, whatever you want to call it, of all the projects, because the policies are going to drive that pretty materially. And then at some point we have to get at least 2 lists, one of existing policies, if that can be pulled together, so we know what's already here. And then as we, you know, think about what's going forward from your perspective and have a debate on those, you know, new policies. And maybe there's even a 3rd list of things that you want to look at to become policies but need more work. I don't know, but just some way to come away with a concrete definition that ultimately goes to council with our recommendations and yours and says, here are the new policies that we think you should put on top of the old policies, you know, to really get, you know, the right direction on the master plan. It seems, and I'm stating this on behalf of the commission, but also for debate. And then at some point, I think you guys have all said, not necessarily tonight, but at some point, we should just take each of these potential policy statements one by one and have a good debate about them. You know, whether that's restrooms in all parks, or, you know, dogs are off leash or whatever, we should just get all those issues on the table and maybe come up collectively with, you know, what we think and should be recommended. And that may not be tonight, but if we can get to any of that, we can do that tonight. So structurally, other commissioners, does that seem to be on target?
Yeah.
All right, so then in terms of commenting on this first slide here, people want to just jump in on the definitions that are up there. Again, I would really like to focus on the policy definition rather than the other ones right now, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. To me, that's the most uncertainty, so we should chew on that, I think.
Yeah. She's going to do that afterwards.
Okay.
I asked the speaker, and she's going to speak afterwards.
Okay.
So I won't go first on that, but did you want to?
Well, I mean, in the ad hoc, we had discussed about the importance of policies, just because the policies drives a lot of the projects and shapes the projects. If you have, you know, for example, if you limit parking in the parks, that will have one issue, as opposed to if you have huge parking lots, that will change some of the actions that we take. So we just want to make sure that the big policies that are going to shape the actions we have are decided up front, so we don't have to iterate.
Do you think the definition of the policy, I think this is the standard definition of a policy, is acceptable?
The one thing I find missing is acquisition. I know that's something, future acquisition of parkland, right? Is that a goal of our policy moving?
That could be one of the policies.
Right. Oh, so that, because we have the laundry list in the definition of program provisions, park maintenance operations, future renovations, capital improvement.
I think that makes sense.
Would acquisition
I mean-
be? Because that's, I don't know, that's a question.
I think that would be an appropriate type of policy.
The policy, right now we say guidance, and to me, I think guidance is more nebulous. I think policies is more,
Directive.
this is letter of the law, this is our direction as opposed to guidance.
Funny you said that. I wrote a clear directive. Yeah.
Great minds think alike.
Yeah, I would think one of the programs would be acquire new parkland. So I wouldn't put it into policy necessarily.
You would not.
I think right now, we're just trying to decide if that's the right definition of policy. Is that where we're on?
Right.
To spell out that we should be acquiring new land.
No, we're just
No.
focusing on what are the words, we're kind of wordsmithing the definition.
Policy is fine.
I think the real challenge with policies is figuring out what is the right level of specificity. So you want to keep policies at a fairly high level because you want them to be able to support a variety of programs and projects that change over time.
That's right.
You don't want it, I don't think, to be very specific and tightly directive. You want it to be somewhat general. And I think it's tricky as we're looking through this list of policies here. There were several that I thought maybe were more program, less policy, but I think it's a very gray area. So I think it's difficult to provide a definition and have everyone understand it the same way, or have it apply the same way to every item you might consider. But for me, I think the key point for the policy is to try and do your best to keep it a high level. For example, if the thing you're recommending is that the city do this specific thing to some specific other thing, that would be a program. But if you want them to consider doing those kinds of things, or a variety of those kinds of things to meet that end, that would be a policy.
Well, it clearly has to be differentiated from the other words that are up there, goals and principles and stuff. I just did a little wordsmithing on my own, and I used words like standard and direction and value-based framework, just to get some thoughts in there. So I have a value-based framework providing a clear standard and direction on an issue by which actions can be measured. And maybe measured is going too far, I don't know, but.
Okay. But also, policies are more strategic. For example, if the council comes in and says, we don't want to maintain the X number of square feet per person for park space, that changes what our actions are going to be, our tactical actions to maintain the park quality. Then we have to make do with what we have. If the council comes and says, no, we want to enforce this, every time we gain 1,000 more people, we should be gaining more parkland to compensate for that. Then that changes how we'll use parkland, because we will have an expanding park system as the city expands. So it's kind of ground rules. I view the policies as ground rules that we follow when we manage the parks.
I agree with that.
See, I agree with that, right? I think this group's certainly is an advisory group for the council, is allowed to make recommendations on policy like that. And please do.
Yeah, Rob?
I was, and maybe this is sort of supporting Commissioner Fennelly's comments a little bit. Not all policies are the same, and some do lend themselves to be more specific and more directive and can be measured, while others, it doesn't make sense to do that because there's a changing dynamic or something. And I do worry if we try and define what a policy is too specifically, then we create the potential of conflict between policies, which we don't want. So I would support sort of a little more broader language. I like some of the comments that Chair Lowing had about standards and strategy, and including that in there somewhere. That made some sense. But
Do you think measured goes too far? Because
Maybe,
some of those can be very clear, like the quantitative ones that you just mentioned, for example. You know, a number of parks per people is
Yeah.
pretty easy to measure against that policy to see if it's
I think it
working.
really works for some. I'm
Yeah.
just not sure it works for all policies.
Yeah, but standards and directions by which, you know, you get your guidance and your action probably does work. That's where I threw in the word framework. Ground rules is another one. I didn't want to put just rules or laws, but, because I was just trying to fiddle with the words apart from putting in the specifics about parks, like just, you know, what would a city policy be?
Yeah.
Because then it has to be applied to all these things and more that are in the document that you folks prepared.
But it's hard because if the policy is too nebulous, then it's just kind of apple pie and motherhood.
Yeah.
Correct.
And
Totally agree.
And that's where having something that's quantitative that you can actually evaluate. Say, maintain the quality of the parks. Well, yes, we want to do that, and that is a policy, but for purposes here, I don't think that's useful because there's no way to measure that.
Right.
It's difficult to measure.
Right.
So is it, are we saying that we're kind of coalescing around a decent definition with some of these words, not that we've written it out exactly? Excuse me.
I like his definition, maybe with the word, something by which projects and programs can be measured, or course of action that, you know, that by which projects and programs can be measured, that provides clear guidance regarding recreation programs, et cetera.
I'm a little worried about the word guidance, because that just sounds like
Yeah.
a suggestion.
Right. I don't like that word at all.
Whereas standards or,
Directive, standard, whatever word.
I think works better. And then I just worked a little bit to try to get kind of community values into it to show that it was infused by that, not just legislation. But I think all these suggestions and the definition breaks it out from the other top two, the principles and goals. There was some debate in the ad hoc about, do we need 5 different categories? But that's another discussion.
So the way I think about it is principles are sort of concepts we like. Health, fun, playful.
Playfulness.
That whole list of principles. The goals are what we want our park system to look like. We want it to be integrated, innovative, evolving, our parks and rec system. And then the principles are what are the priorities we should consider in trying to make it be a great park system. That's X, Y, and Z. That's the policies. And then the programs and projects are the nitty-gritty, how do we get there?
Could you repeat your policy one again? So that was a little bit different than what I heard last time.
What are the priorities we should consider in trying to achieve the goals?
I don't think that's right.
Right.
Because the priorities is the next step after we have the policies in place that are going to help direct that, maybe even put some boundaries around that. It's the prioritization process that takes place after we have the policies and all that other stuff above it.
I think the policies are the priorities, and the programs are the implementation of the priorities.
A policy to have bathrooms everywhere. I'm not sure how that, well, there aren't any priorities there because it's everywhere, but
I think it's both. I think it's both policies and projects that implement the goal. And so, and we've talked about some of the policies read sort of a little bit more like best practices or something, but that still can be considered a policy that we're going to follow this standard to achieve this goal. So I don't think they have to fall sort of exactly one after the other. I think you use both to effectively implement the goal.
Like you have a policy to have bathrooms in parks. But a program would be, we got this much money, we're gonna build one in this park, this park, this park, and this park, and this park. That's a program. The policy is we should have it.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? Well, that means that we don't have a policy to not have it, right? Like, there's people who think you shouldn't have bathrooms in parks because of this reason, that reason, that reason.
Yeah.
So the policy says we should have them. So I do think it sort of seems like a higher level issue.
I agree with that. I think that's well articulated, or take dogs. If we make a policy that we want off-leash dogs, that's the policy.
That's a policy, right?
How it's implemented, if we prioritize the north versus the south versus shared uses, what was that? Shared use versus non-shared use, that starts to get into the prioritization of a policy. I think that's the hierarchy.
And so what it means is, it says course of action, it sort of depends on what you mean by a course of action. It's almost like, a guidance for how courses of action should.
That's right. I also thought that was a little bit too specific because it was going to the action already as opposed to the policy around the standards.
Interpret a course of action. But yes.
The way I think about it is the goals are the strategic goals that we want. The policies are the ground rules that we have to fit our actions into, and the projects and the programs are the tactical actions that we take to fulfill the goals, to fulfill the strategic goals.
Almost like a test should be, simple test for policy should be, is there a logical anti-policy? You can't find an anti-policy when the policy doesn't make sense, right? We have dogs off-leash, or we have dogs on-leash. We have dogs off-leash in parks, or we don't have dogs off-leash in parks.
It's one or the other.
Where an action
So
should
maybe-
have an anti-action.
Maybe with this sort of tweaked or evolved definition of policies, we should just take on a couple here as test cases, just to see what works. So if you just went to one on whatever draft policies.
Well, we have some in the back. When we get to later in the package.
Okay, I was just going to use this as an example, and then they can take back over here. But so 1B is just exactly what you said. It's so specific. Retain a 5-acre standard parkland per 1,000 residents. So if that becomes the policy, that's very clear. It's a statement, and then there's ways to implement that. But we could still prioritize north versus south, or small parks versus large parks. Less clear to me about 1A.
So the next part of the presentation, actually, we've called out a few policies we think require more discussion, and it's not really clear, given all the public feedback, what the policy direction should be.
Right.
And so we have a few of those in this.
Yeah, no, that's what Keith was saying, but I just wanted to kind of point back to the other issue before we got to those, which I think are good, which is that as I went through here a few times, some of these things, obviously, by the definition of policy here and as we've tweaked it, to me fit. But others are sort of too fuzzy or a little bit too apple pie and not standards of performance kind of thing.
So 1A, I think, is
so
good.
1A is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Emphasize equity and affordability in providing programs and services.
I think it would be helpful to get all of the commissioners' feedback on the 46. So it's 46, right? There's a lot. I mean, we take a lot of time if we took them one at a time.
Right.
But we take the big ones where we know there's a lot of discussions to have, and there's significant policy choices one way or the other. And we take the time to do that this evening.
Right. Well, what I'm still doing is I'm still on the earlier issue of defining what a policy should look like when it's written up. So the question I'm putting is, now that we have a better definition and a working, more accepted definition of policy, and I just picked one because it's one.
Yeah.
The second thing, to me, is a very clear definition of a policy. I'm not sure that the first one fits as a definition of a policy.
I think there's a few in there like that, maybe more than a few. But we will need to go back and rewrite. I think the discussion about policy definition was a really good one, and it needs to start with something like, it is a standard value-based framework that guides a course of action, that kind of thing. I mean, it started to make a little more sense to me as I was just listening to you all. And so we'll rework that and also go through the policies again with another cut and see if some of them really are more programs or is it really written as a best practice or a policy. and then come back with a next version next month. But also, I'm sort of curious about some of these difficult policy decisions that and we picked 3 or 4, and there may be a couple of others that you've identified as also needing some substantive discussion as a commission.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be
Yeah.
very, very good. I just wanted to make the point that I'm not sure that now that we've got a better definition of policies, that these are actually all policies.
I agree.
So instead of going through all 46 collectively, maybe you guys do another draft. I would totally agree. Other commissioners?
Yeah, I suspect if we went through the whole list, we would not agree on which of these were policies and which weren't among us.
yes.
So it does make sense, I think, for you all to try.
Yeah, but to that point though, Commissioner Headley, if we could get, I don't know what the right date would be, but enough time that we could then collectively look at all of your feedback and look where there's sort of alignment and where there is differences. So then we can, hone in on those for next month's discussion. Because there may be a number of places where you're pretty aligned, right? We want to get that information. You've already gone through this, I think, in a pretty detailed way. Maybe you would go into more, but it looked like you went through each one and gave a comment that have
not
an issue.
whether it's a program or policy so much.
But maybe go back and do that as well, and take the next 2 weeks or something to do that exercise. That'll really help staff to bring back a more meaningful document next month.
But would you give us the new draft first that took out things that look more like programs and non-policies?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be more efficient for the commissioners, I think.
So. Let me think about it, because I want to be careful about that, because you may not agree, right?
I don't think we will.
So I think we're better off leaving it in there, and then, if there's consensus, I mean, you just say not a policy or whatever, keep it simple. And if we see that is a consistent opinion, maybe it's already our opinion too, but at least we affirm it by hearing it from you all. I know it's a little more work to do it that way, but otherwise I fear we will remove something that you probably may not want removed, or one of you or a couple of you.
It raises the spectrum of the last 546 projects that we had to comment on in the last document.
Do that again.
The specter, excuse me.
Much smaller days.
But some of these could be policies, and they're kind of on the fringe of being policy.
Right.
Like 1H, encourage walking and biking as a preferred method to getting to and from parks. If you're saying we just want that, then I don't think that's really a policy. But if you say limit the number of parking spaces to half of what it is right now, then that becomes a policy. Does that make sense? That just saying we want people to bike and walk to parks, I don't think that's a policy by itself, but I think if you're now saying concrete steps we're going to do, then it becomes a policy.
See, I'd say limiting the parking spots would be the program that falls under that policy.
I would have said the opposite too. You said policy is walking and biking are the preferred methods of getting to and from parks, and we're going to discourage the use of cars. Right?
And the programs are how?
The programs are what you just said.
Yeah.
Just because for me, one of the things is that, like when we were at the sustainability summit, or the brief outbrief of that of the council, I think if we tried to limit parking spaces at parks or reduce the number of parking spaces, there would be some feedback. And so I think that that's kind of a big step to take. And so I would want clear direction from the council on that big step. That's why I think it isn't so much that, I agree, it is a tactical step, but it's a controversial tactical step.
But that's why you would have that's why you don't stop at the policy level, you continue on to the program.
There are policy implications there, right? Reduce parking, we're going to avoid having we're going to limit parking spaces, we're going to get rid of parking spaces generally. That is sort of a policy. It's sort of, maybe there's policies, sub-poli.
I think it is program-based, and it's site-specific, because it may make sense for some to limit parking, but it's very conditional based on where the location is, what parking is adjacent, what other facility. That's again why the policy seems to me to be better written, sort of more higher level than this.
Right.
Like this.
Okay.
So,
If there's any other comments on that, then we'll go with that game plan, and then we can carry on with your slideshow here.
All right.
So I'm going to talk about the draft goals, and I know we're here to talk mostly about policies, but we did want to present our proposed goals. So we have 5 goals that were developed from consolidating the areas of focus and sort of grouping the areas of focus into like goals. These are the same areas of focus that were used to guide the community prioritization challenge. And then we added a 6th goal, which focuses more on how we're managing the system as a whole efficiently and effectively and sustainably. So goal 1 is provide high-quality facilities and services that are accessible, inclusive, and distributed equitably across Palo Alto. This is a consolidation of 3 areas of focus and is really focused on the accessibility, inclusiveness, and also equal distribution of the facilities across the city. I did want to mention that there is one area of focus in here that I know the ad hoc committee had proposed combining with another area of focus, and that other area of focus is under a different goal, so that's why we did not combine those. And I can talk about that more when we get to that 2nd goal. It's on the next slide. Because when we do go to goal 2, which is enhance the capacity, quality, and variety of uses of the existing system of parks, recreation, and open space facilities and services, this is where we had the areas of focus related to sports fields and off-leash dogs. And we did make a note in the presentation that the ad hoc committee has proposed consolidating the sports field and the off-leash dogs areas of focus, and the proposed language is included there. We haven't necessarily committed to one or the other, but I wanted to represent them both here.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
By presenting the areas of focus under here, they're for our purposes to understand where those goals came from.
Correct.
Are they then not going to be part of the organization of the master plan? We're going to have, the goals are going to replace them.
Exactly. So the areas of focus will still be in the master plan because they were
as part of the process.
Right, a part of the process, but they're not going to be in the entire hierarchy of the master plan. It's going to go like the definitions were, and areas of focus will be taken out. It's just for demonstration purposes here. So can you do there? Goal 3 is create environments that encourage active and passive activities, support health, wellness, and social connections. This includes 2 areas of focus and is not only the physical health and well-being associated with our parks, facilities, and programs, but also some more of the sort of mental wellness, community social connections. And then goal 4 is to integrate nature, natural systems, and ecological principles throughout Palo Alto. Goal 5 is develop innovative programs, services, and strategies for expanding the system. So goal 2 was focused more on enhancing what we have existing, and goal 5 is focused on expanding the system that we have. And that's the 2 areas of focus that the ad hoc group had suggested consolidating fall under goal 1 and goal 5, and we did feel that those were 2 sort of different areas. And so we did choose to keep those separate. And then we added a 6th goal, which is manage Palo Alto's land and services effectively, efficiently, and sustainably. And this might be a goal where some of those best practices that we talk about, we're still trying to get our head around those best practices and how they'll fit into the master plan, but it's possible that they might fall under this goal, which is sort of how do we manage what we have effectively, efficiently, and sustainably.
It's interesting that you're saying that offering new recreation programs, let's say, would be expanding the system. I guess when I think of expanding the system, I think of buying new land, but I guess if you're expanding the scope of recreation programs, that is kind of the same thing.
Right,
You're
that's how we
expanding.
looked at it. There's the actual facilities and the land, and then there's the programs. So that represents the program side of it.
Yeah, quite often we just think about parks. Recreation's sometimes the stepchild.
So what
Not to Rob.
We are asking for comments and feedback today, and then also discuss next steps for the goals. So if we need to revise some goals, we can take those away and come back. If there's a need for an ad hoc to resolve some of the goals, we can discuss that. So it's.
I think the
comments?
goals are pretty good. I think goal 2 also represents the nature area of focus when you're talking about the capacity and quality of our parks and open space. The nature element has to come in there, I think. So when I looked at the policies, not to jump ahead, but there was basically nothing in there about open space. So we need to add more in that area, and I think it could go in goal 2 as well as goal 4. Goal 4, I think, should be not just integrate nature, natural systems, and ecological principles, but protect and integrate, or preserve and integrate. I think we need more than just integrate in that goal. So that was really the big gap that I felt like in the goals, was there was nothing really recognizing the importance of our ecosystems.
So I have a question to clarify your first comment on goal 2. And do you mean to add something that's related to conservation of the open space?
I would add that to the nature element.
Okay.
As well, I guess I would put it in both places. But not just conservation, but when we're working on the Bixby Park trails, one of the issues that kept coming up was how the loop trail impedes habitat corridors. So improving the quality and capacity of our open space, those loop trails expand the capacity for people, but they don't expand the capacity for animals in some ways. So I think there's a place under that goal for that kind of consideration.
Okay. Because
it has to show up somewhere.
Right.
I guess I don't feel very strongly which goal it falls under, but I do think we need a lot more of that.
Because we do have I'm just thinking about the comprehensive conservation plans that we'll be doing in the future for all the open space areas.
Right.
So how that would tie in without being redundant into those plans as well.
Well, I think we should incorporate that by reference in this plan.
Okay.
For example, that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm trying to get
Right.
at, that should show up in this master plan
Got it.
as a priority.
I think going forward, we could probably add some more language to that too. But rather than trying to have it in 2 goals, it would make more sense of trying to go 4 in a way that it captures all those elements you mentioned.
That's
Conservation.
Right. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to put policies under goals if it straddles 2 different goals.
Well, but it's the area of focus that straddles the goal, not necessarily the policy. I don't know. I don't feel strongly about which goal it falls under.
Okay.
I just think it needs to be somewhere.
Okay.
And I'm just trying to think if we're going to, well, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
But other questions other comments on goals? Commissioner Ederle?
No.
Oh, okay. Did you have anything, Abby?
No.
Okay. Okay. Good to go. I just thought that the last one seemed a little bit fuzzy. I'm kind of into measurement now. And so effectively and efficiently and sustainably, I mean, on the one hand, I get where you're going there, and you want to put a stake in the ground on that, but it's sort of like,
how do we know when we're there?
Is that really effective or sort of effective? So I don't know. I don't have any good suggestions for that, but it seemed a little fuzzy to me.
Well, you do have the sustainability goals, and just like the discussion we just had about nature, I think that everything in goal 2 is going to be affected by sustainability and by integrating nature. And so I just summarized goal 6 as sustainability.
But they're trying to say more there than that, right?
I think you mean regarding sustainability?
More than sustainability.
Right, yeah.
So what you're saying is that everything we do has to be efficient and effective. Efficient and effective. Sort of seems like mom and apple pie. It seems like everything in government should be effective and efficient.
It should be. Isn't it always? And I actually think the point that you made there, Chair Lowing, is a good one about that one. And maybe there is something we can add in there that would improve it considerably, is if we say something about data and measurement. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
we're trying to manage these programs and services and land effectively, efficiently, and sustainably in a way that uses data and measuring the work effectively.
So if you
I
have,
mean, I think that
if you have greenhouse gas emissions for the city, does every tree, every bush, and every open space equal X amount of greenhouse gases absorbed that you could offset cars on the street? I mean, I never thought about that, but isn't that essentially what the sustainability goals are saying? So we should add up all the trees, count up all the trees.
we have counted up all the.
Yeah, we have.
You do, you have,
Yeah.
And
But you're saying that this should-
acres of open space equals X number of cars you can have on the street.
Well, that's assuming that the trees are growing in the open space and they never die.
Right.
In steady state,
Always change.
they're always dying and
you plant a new
decomposing,
one.
so.
But Rob's not talking here, as the goal is not talking here, just about sustainability. It's also about even measuring services being performed effectively.
Right.
Yeah.
You're trying to put that all under that
It's all
umbrella.
initiatives
Right.
that you're doing.
And the goal specifically says we will use data and quantitative and qualitative measures.
Right. Measured against objectives and, where possible, outside data standards.
Maybe that's what you just need to add, utilize quantitative and qualitative.
Everything you're doing about cutting down the amount of water you use, I mean, that should be in there.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm. That's a good
Wouldn't
point.
using qualitative and quantitative measures be a
policy?
policy under this goal?
That's true.
Yeah, it could be. You could do it that way.
I actually thought this was more of a policy, now that we're thinking about, because so the policy is the top of the tree, and a goal is maybe a branch that comes down, right? So
The goal is above the policy.
well, if your goal is to be sustainable and effective and efficient, right, okay, oh my gosh, right, okay, sorry, I think.
But maybe you can just take a look at that and see if there's ways to talk in the right
No,
ways
no,
about
it's all good.
measurement, measured against best practices or something like that, so that there's not just, yep, we were efficient, you get an A, so.
Okay, we'll work on that one as well.
The one thing that did bother us also in goal 2 was the calling out of the sports fields and the dog parks, just because there's a lot of things that Parks and Rec do, and we're calling out 2 specific things, and do we want to go that detailed in the goal? But they are big players, so.
But that's out now, right? That's not
Right,
specifically
it's
mentioned.
not going to be in the goal.
Right.
It's just
just
the areas of
The
focus.
areas of
that
focus.
we're-
Just something they thought
Just for
about.
our purposes to understand everything.
Where the goal, how the goal was.
Oh.
Right.
Okay.
But the areas of focus aren't going to be tied to this when it's presented to council. That's my understanding, right?
It's just today's hot buttons, tomorrow will be something different.
Okay, then that makes sense then. I thought you were getting rid of the name of the area of focus, but still when you specified these goals, the sub-bullets would always go with them. Okay.
No.
Okay.
Okay, draft policies, 7.
Which says draft polices, by the way.
Oh,
Might want to change that or go across all. Oh, it's correct.
All right, this is a conversation we're going to have about the policies, and how we're going to break this up is that we have identified some of the policies that do merit some more or further discussion to pinpoint those and understand those more of what actually the policy is going to be. So I start this basically by just putting up our definition that we talked about previously and stating that in the packet that you received, a total of 46 proposed policies that support the 6 goals are there. And what we really want to do is then focus then tonight our discussion on the following, which would be synthetic turf, off-leash dog parks, restrooms, service areas, which we'll discuss, and then, of course, if there's other policies that even the commissioners feel really strongly about that want to discuss further, we can discuss those as well. Again, this goes back to the goals, so what we're proposing is that the feedback we receive here tonight on these specific ones that we reviewed, that we will then redraft the policy per our discussion and then bring that back next month for review again. And then again, with your comments on all of them and the comments on this, if next meeting we don't come to a consensus about what the policy is going to be for these, then we can discuss forming ad hoc committees for them to vet them out more and get our policy set correctly of how the commission feels they should be drafted. So that's kind of going to be our process, and we'll discuss that a little bit too before we start this. So it's basically us taking your feedback tonight on these specific things, redrafting them, bringing back to you, and if there's still conflict on them, if we want to then proceed with forming an ad hoc to flesh out the ones that we don't agree on or not meshing with the group, then we can do that.
Well, depending on how long we want to go tonight, there will be more than those 5 bullet points.
Yes.
So we can add some more tonight if we have time, but if we don't, we just have to be reasonable about the clock, and then we may just have to pick them up fresh at the next meeting.
Well, yeah, but in addition, though, what we would like is to get your feedback between now and next meeting, and if you have specific feedback around the policy, and you think it ought to be this way, or this is how you've understood the information we've heard from the public, that the policy should head in this direction. It'd be good to get that from the commission, right? Like I said earlier, because there may be more consensus there than we know. And if we know, then
you might get some of that tonight too. I was just saying that we may not be able to debate fully every policy that we think needs to be debated just because of the time constraints.
Can I make a
Go ahead.
suggestion? I would suggest that we get all of the other policy questions or issues on the table so we know which ones we're looking at from having what emerges from the policies that were suggested here. And then rather than going one by one and debating each item on the list, that we try to do some triage and figure out, okay, synthetic turf, for example, I don't think most of us have a lot of expertise about the pros and cons on either side of adopting a policy that's pro-turf or anti-turf or sort of turf. So that would be one maybe where I might ask for staff to come back with, these are the arguments for and against on this issue, rather than debating it now, not knowing really what the full scope of the debate is. And there may be some that we can easily come to agreement on. There may be some that are really hard to come to agreement on. If we could just triage where we need more info before we can have a really useful discussion, that might be helpful.
Well, question for you. You got feedback on February 18th. You dealt with, you thought about it, and evidently these areas, of the 46, these are the areas that you're having the most trouble with and need the most input on. That's why you had the meeting last week, and that's why you have this meeting. So are you asking us to specifically look at these because they're the ones that are giving you the most trouble, and the rest of them we'll deal with as time permits?
Yeah, essentially that's correct. These are the ones that have percolated to the top from staff perspective that really require more discussion and input.
Because I don't want to waste time on all 46 if these are the 5 or 6 that are giving you the most trouble.
Yeah, but it's not the 46. What Commissioner Hatterley is saying is that it's probably more than 5 and less than 46, so we should just put all those on the table.
Okay.
So we know what the scope is, correct?
Yeah, I'm saying if commissioners, having read the list of policies, if there were some that they said, whoa, wait a minute, I don't want to do that,
Add them to the
that's
list.
something you want to add to the list so
Yeah.
that we can
Okay.
discuss it.
So do you
Right.
want to do that quickly then?
Yeah, so my only other question on your suggestion is, do you want to do that before these 5 are considered?
That's going to take another 45 minutes or so.
You think?
I think because there's a lot there.
Okay.
I mean, I would prefer to have you all think about those things, one of the most important policy concerns you have in the 46, and send that to staff. And then we'll look at all of them and see, where there is consensus around an issue, and bring them back next month. Because these ones here, that's a pretty big discussion right here, just to get through these 4. And
Yeah, so you're looking for resolution on these?
not resolution, but
More feedback.
feedback. Some, maybe there is resolution, some, maybe we need more information. There's a gap.
Okay.
That's where I'm at. I don't know.
Right, I think the intent was to look at each of these that could go either way as far as a policy goes. And like it says, either hear feedback, or there may be instances, for example, we already have an ad hoc for the dog parks. It may be to focus the discussion of the ad hoc on the questions we're presenting here, similar to the turf. I think we agree, and Darren agrees, that we do need data and we do need to look at both sides. So I don't know if an ad hoc is appropriate for that, or if it's just having someone from the commission participate with staff as we develop that. Our intent wasn't to resolve them all here, or necessarily to get in a long heated debate about any of them, but just sort of present, this is where we are, and what should our next step be in resolving that.
Yeah, all I know is that when I went to that meeting, there was a lot of good input, and I had some feedback, but I didn't want to give it in that meeting. But,
Okay,
I'd like to give it sometime. You want me to
All right.
provide my comments?
then we'll do it Plan A, what we originally talked about doing.
Yeah, I think there's time, and the commission is interested in spending the time here at this meeting, after we try a couple and go through them, to then go around and ask, for the highlights that you really want to discuss next month. If you want to do that, we can still do that.
Yeah, okay.
Do you want to do public comment first, or at the very end?
I was going to do this at the very end so that they would have the benefit of all this. Who's launching here?
It's
Peter.
this one on the turf grass.
Yeah, so the first one is then discussing
Now.
synthetic turf policy. And the policy, as laid out, is what is up on the screen there, which is to design and maintain a high-quality turf sports fields with adequate time for resting to support maximum use in parks by multiple organized sports, casual users with areas large enough for practice or play. The next part of that is invest in tournament quality, high-wear sports field turf, which is talking about using synthetic turf as a designated sports field used for full-time for sports where lighting is possible. So this one talks, I guess, using either turf, natural turf, or using synthetic turf as basically what the policy is going to be going forward for our sports fields. And the policy directions can be then have a variety of directions you could go. There are choices. You can basically expand the use of synthetic turf in selected locations. You can grandfather in existing synthetic turf fields but not add any new synthetic turf fields. Building all natural turf systems with enhanced drainage, irrigation, turf grass that can support intensive play by organized sports. And the final one is consider on a case-by-case basis, and not a solidify a specific stance now. If we do want to add synthetic sports fields in the future or not, or just use natural grass. So those are the options of the directions the policy can go in that we're basically looking for feedback on.
Can I concur in that, what Jennifer said? I don't know enough about turf, synthetic versus natural, why I should have an opinion one way or the other. So can you give a quick sort of
Darren's
lesson
probably the best equipped to do
in
that.
turf?
I could, but it will not be comprehensive, and so much like the dog discussion, I think it warrants more lengthy investigation, more lengthy research, and more thoughtful debate once we've really delved into the pros and cons. The other one concerning synthetic versus natural is it's in flux. That industry of synthetic turf is not static. You started with an AstroTurf that I think a lot of people think of in the earlier days of the NFL, and that's still in people's minds, and that's not what we have today. It's continually evolved. It evolved over the last just couple of years from what we put in at Stanford Palo originally to what we put in at El Camino Park, and it's different in terms of the infill, the blades, the structure, the heat it produces. So it's dynamic and changing, and that factors into this discussion to some degree. So I can give you a nutshell analysis between some of the pros and cons, but really I think it needs to be more robust.
This is an example of one that I would agree with Commissioner Hederle, that it should be tabled until we have enough knowledge.
I think I'm concerned that we're not going to have all the knowledge we want to make some of these policy recommendations. I think this is a good example because there's so much that we're still learning about this fairly new product. And so given that information, what does that mean in terms of policy direction? Right?
I would say that there's no change in policy, because
there isn't a policy.
Wait, so,
Right.
okay, when you're thinking about policy with regard to sustainability then and protecting the environment, how does the turf, because that's a goal, right? So how does choosing one turf over the other impact that? So that's what I'm thinking about with regard.
But it's not a one issue subject. That's the problem.
Right.
Right.
So
we can't
that's
make a policy
where
around one issue. So
yeah.
just sustainability. I mean, there's safety,
Right.
there's cost, there's frequency of maintenance, all that stuff.
So,
Users' preferences, yeah.
Right. So it seems to me that because there are a few in there, in my judgment, that are like that we don't have enough data to make a new policy, and so we can't, and therefore it has to wait 3 months, 6 months, a year until we can make a policy. We can't just invent something. So, and that's okay, because new policies in the future can affect new decisions as parks are put together. Did you have a comment?
I was just going to say, one of your choices might be, we don't have a policy on this at this time.
Right.
yeah.
Right.
In the meeting, it was brought up that there are some.
Sorry, what meeting is this?
The ones that the stakeholders.
Stakeholders, okay.
Because I was just like Abby, I didn't know much, but a lot of things came out in that meeting, and mainly it was health concerns and also environmental concerns, the little balls of plastic, the little plastic balls that are in there, they're going to go into the bay and, fish are going to eat them. And I didn't know anything about that. And as far as the health concerns, as Darren has pointed out, there's been so much flux, so much change in the industry that the health concerns are getting less. They're not all gone, but they're less. So having a policy that says we will never have synthetic turf, I think is not going to happen, because they are improving the synthetic turf to get rid of the health issues, and they know about the environmental issues, so I think they're going to be working on those. We have to work on those as well. And so, but then the natural grass, you have to use organic fertilizer, and you've got to use enough water, but not too much water. And now they're creating new kinds of grasses, like this bunch grass that kept coming up, that is easier to water, so if we had a policy that says no more synthetic turf or no more natural grass, I don't think that would be appropriate at this point, because it's changing so much. But if you could come back and tell us that we are improving the synthetic turf that we use from now on, and we're improving the natural grass that we're using from now on, and we should, on a case-by-case basis, use one or the other, and we could make a policy like that. But what Abby's saying is, we don't know all the health risks. We don't know all the changes in the industry for both natural and synthetic. So
all 5 of us are in agreement on that point, so I think we can't do a policy change on that. And
Well,
to the extent that you want input, then, I think Kristen said, you can have a person aligned with a staff member as you work on it, or we can do an ad hoc, or you can come back with a staff report, lots of options.
Yeah, I just would say that there isn't a policy. It's not a policy change. There is no policy.
Correct.
On this. And I think, I don't want to speak for council, but I've heard some council members speak about this, and also probably don't have enough information really to understand it, but nevertheless have an opinion that we should abolish all synthetic turf, or at least seriously consider that.
Wait, they're pro-synthetic?
No, they're anti.
Anti. Okay.
So it seems to be silent on the topic. It would be.
We can take it on as a project, but we can't take it on without more knowledge.
But then I think we ought to have that in the master plan that says something about what we ought to be doing to better understand and be educated about whether we should or shouldn't use synthetic turf. And maybe that's as far as we can go in terms of a policy statement or a program. Maybe it's a program.
What I had said at the top of the hour is maybe there's a third list of policies that have to be investigated for change or development that just aren't there yet. And that seems to be one to me. Yeah.
But how does
the
this
thing too that's interesting in this one is that stemming from a policy currently now, I guess the program that we use then to decide if we're going to use synthetic turf is that we have set up a testing system for the synthetic turf that has to meet standards that are set by the government, the federal and local government, that meet the environmental, whatever, for lead and all those kind of things that we're testing for. So, you can start to get and develop, I guess, the policy or the program that supports the policy to start stating that if we, on a case-by-case basis, if we do consider this, that we do have these things in place that basically, instead of us then trying to figure out what is the best, because as we discussed, it is changing, the material is changing, that they're making it more environmentally friendly, that we have something that, so every time that they have to basically show us these test results that it passes.
Criteria for evaluation.
Right.
I guess. Yep.
So, I think that's where the last one comes into play, is that it is kind of like the out that we are basically making up it's not a really definitive policy, but it is considered on a case-by-case basis. But under that policy, then it would have these steps of what you would do then to determine what the best scenario is, for what you would do there.
But how does this affect our actions? I mean, obviously, when you put a soccer field in, it would change whether the surface is natural or synthetic, but it wouldn't change the number of fields that we need, would it? Are we trying to say...
It could over the long term, yeah.
Are we saying that if we don't have synthetic, we have to have more soccer fields? Because okay.
I don't think we're saying that.
There's significantly more hours of use on a synthetic field. So it's
But by
less.
adopting a policy about whether we're pro or con synthetic turf, that's not also adopting a policy that we want more soccer fields, therefore.
No, not necessarily.
But if you want to maintain the same number of games per week played in Palo Alto fields, then you would have to have more fields.
There's less capacity. If you have no synthetic turf, just say as an example.
Okay. So then
that's less capacity than.
Okay, then this is.
It has an impact.
Yeah.
So
next.
no policy on that.
Flip that
There's
page.
no policy on that. Yeah, I get a sense of what we might do there, what we might bring back on.
I have a question on that, just really quick. This third bullet, building an all-natural turf system with enhanced drainage, irrigation, and turf grass that can support intensive play by organized sports. Is there such a thing?
Yeah, every field aims for that. It's really about investing in it and making it as robust as possible. So if you are playing on a field with inadequate drainage, for example, it will underperform, wear out more quickly, and be less safe. And if you were to invest in it and put in the right drainage system, a more modern irrigation system, and perhaps a more robust maintenance program, it would be enhanced and better, safer.
Right, so basically most of the turf fields that we have in the parks weren't really built for high-use sports activities. They were built for people to go out and casually play on. If we wanted to increase the capacity of those, then we'd have to increase the amount of money that we'd have to spend on those, because we basically have to rebuild them again with the framework of a sports field, not just an area of grass so someone can go kick a ball around on, which would help to expand the usability of those as far as our sports fields goes. Of course, they could still be used as they were before as passive play areas, but then on the weekends when you wanted to have soccer games there, then you could have them there, you could have more, you could have them for longer periods of time because your infrastructure is built to hold that capacity, which right now most of them aren't. So, which then puts a lot of burden then on Darren and his team, because they're trying to maintain those fields at the level
Much more expensive.
that we want them to be, but it doesn't really have the infrastructure to really do that stuff. So
So that to me, it seems to me the most compelling reason why we would want to consider these questions as, why we would want to consider creating a policy around these questions. Because if in fact the commission were to come around and say we all agree about bullet number 3 being the direction we should go, then we definitely want a policy in the master plan that would then direct funding, that would help support funding for this investment, because it would be a significant investment.
And I should point out, they're not mutually exclusive. Of course, you can enhance your natural grass fields and still do whatever you want with the synthetic ones and add more. They're not mutually exclusive.
So maybe the question that we're dodging by focusing on the type of turf is really, do we want to expand the capacity? Do we want to expand our sports field inventory or capacity, right? Do we need to play longer on the fields that we have, and do we need new fields? And I think we keep always saying the data says we don't need new fields, and MIG keeps saying you need new fields.
well, I think in the terms too of new fields that you're saying is the new fields also encompasses retrofitting the current fields that we have just to have the infrastructure to take more of a pounding, basically. Yeah.
And part of this analysis that we're talking about for the synthetic versus natural would naturally include the fact that we have inadequate rest periods for our existing natural grass fields. And what that means is we do that so we can increase capacity. And what that means, the result of that is poorer conditions, right? If you expand the rest periods, you have a better quality field. And we see that time and time again when we happen to get windows long enough to properly restore and regrow turf. And when they're shrunk, we see the reverse. But if you had more fields, you could, in theory, sustain the same amount of play in better conditions with longer rest periods. So what I'm getting at is that would be one element of many in this discussion on synthetic versus natural, and inform all those policy discussions.
And there is a separate policy on fields that there's a recommendation in here on that as well, which would obviously impact that whole area even more significantly. Can we move to dogs?
Sure. Now this one already has an agenda.
So where does that leave us? What is our next step on the turf question?
Staff has to decide.
On what I heard, and we have to think about this and discuss it, but with this idea of building a more rigorous, robust turf management system from the natural grass system is something that would be good.
But you still can't get the same capacity as an artificial turf.
No, you can't.
So if you want to get rid of artificial turf fields, you need more soccer fields to keep the same capacity.
Right. I'm not sure. Would you say that last part again?
If you got rid of artificial turf, or if you converted artificial turf fields to natural turf, you would need additional playing areas to keep the same capacity.
That's right. Yeah. And what I also heard was we need a lot more information about synthetic turf to have a specific policy that would guide whether we should add more synthetic turf or get rid of some of the synthetic turf.
Yeah, I would like to see more synthetic turf that's environmentally sensitive and it covers all the health concerns.
If it can be done, right?
Yeah, and I would see a healthy mix of natural and synthetic on a case-by-case basis if you have two incredibly good alternatives. A really, really good synthetic turf and a really, really good natural turf.
Right.
That would be my policy.
Yeah.
And
So the answer is that you need to come back to us with a bit more information.
Well, and I think around synthetic turf, it's probably, someone said, I think it's Peter, around some set of standards and criteria for what it means to have an environmentally sustainable sort of turf, which may not fully exist now. I know we're doing some work on it, but there's still questions even about the best products that are out there.
But that criteria also would affect natural turf because you need a lot more water to maintain natural, so that's a sustainability issue, and that would fall under the same kind of criteria. So, and then the only thing I'm thinking about too is this goes to your point about, do we need more fields? Like, is that a policy that, right? They're linked. So if you're changing from synthetic to natural, they're completely linked, those two issues.
Yeah.
Because do you want more passive play? Like, can a family go to a park on a Saturday and actually have a picnic without getting a soccer ball kicked in their head?
I haven't seen any data that convinces me that we should aggressively go out and be converting fields to synthetic turf. I just don't. You know, the user groups say they want more and they want lights and they want things.
Yeah.
But they want to play 5 days a week or 7 days a week or whatever. So,
there's other people that use parks for different reasons besides organized sports. So, yeah.
So that's where we are. And I think that's where the commission is.
Okay.
Right.
But we also need to talk to the users too.
Oh, we have, yeah.
And they want 4 seasons.
They want 4 seasons.
And they want till
the
10
whole place
p.m.
would be a
They want
light.
till 10 p.m.
Well, that's what I just said, there's a policy on that we can review if we want, but the recommendation from staff is that we maintain the existing policy, which includes the limited number, if we want to call that limited, non-7 days a week for practice times,
Yeah.
as a way of controlling the capacity for fields. And so that's an existing policy. Can we go to dogs?
Dogs.
Yes. This one too, I hope that Darren chimes in a lot because of these that we're going to review tonight, this one does have an ad hoc group that has been spending a lot of time on it. So really, when you get down to the policy itself, address the need for more off-leash dog spaces throughout the city, but continue to exclude off-leash dogs from open space preserves. Would be what to review, and then the directions you could go to would be to modify the city ordinance or park rules and regulations to exclude dogs leashed or unleashed from park playgrounds, but to allow off-leash dogs in designated off-leash areas, and maintaining the current policy of limited dogs to enclosed/fence areas, but funding additional and improved dog parks. So, again, this is basically what I think the ad hoc committee for this has been trying to tackle, of what one of these policies would be the best. Of course, now you have to have your dog on the leash, and if it's not, it has to be in a dog park fenced area, is basically our current policy for that. And then do we want to keep and maintain that, or do we want to expand it to having these off-leash dog areas? Or a combination of both. So.
Sure, and I'd be glad to chime in, Peter. Thanks for that. The ad hoc committees, as you know, I think I've given you several updates on this, and there's not a lot new from our last update, but a tremendous amount of work and research and analysis and thinking has already gone into this, much like we are talking about doing for synthetic versus natural. I think we're at a good stage. We're really close to being able to come back to the commission, I believe. We've got a meeting with the ad hoc tomorrow, talk it through, but we've got something I'm hoping to share with them. I haven't had their feedback yet, really, so it's not complete. But I think it's the the potential basis for something robust enough that you could say, I think this is a feasible plan that says, here's a policy regarding dog parks. Let's go with dedicated sites only. We have an equal and fair distribution across the city, and it'll answer some of the questions on which way to go policy-wise, is my hope. So I hope to bring that back to you real soon, pending our discussion tomorrow with the ad hoc, and see where it goes from there.
Which seems like, in the context of this master plan planning, we could come up with a new policy, or an existing policy, but
Yeah.
new information.
And Darren, is it fair to say that's basically the second bullet point here, which is, it's not to try and change the ordinance, but to fund additional and improved dog parks across the city?
It would, except for the first bullet point. One is sort of independent from all this, and that's keeping dogs out of playgrounds. That would kind of be its own park rule and regulation. It's unaffiliated necessarily with dog parks or off-leash areas. It's just whether leashed or not, dogs in playgrounds has been a problem, frequent complaints from visitors, but no specific rule. I think it's a very easy thing to amend in our park rules and regulations. So it's really separate from this, but something policy consideration for the commission to think about. And now it's an opportune time to wrap it into our discussions to say, does that sound right? Should we be precluding them from playgrounds? I would encourage that. It's been something I've received a lot of complaints about for many years, and I think it's a good idea for a number of reasons. But separate again from this discussion on where you should have off leash and whether it should be fenced or unfenced.
Commissioner Hurley had a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to clarify that I don't think that the ad hoc committee has really addressed in any full way whether or not we should modify the leash law to allow off-leash dogs in unfenced areas anywhere. So that's on here because that's something that we really need to get a sense from the commission as a whole, whether that's something worth pursuing. Is it a dead-on-arrival kind of idea? Is it a great idea that we should figure out whether it can work here? They're doing it in Mountain View. But I think it takes, that would be a really hard and controversial choice to go with that policy to change that leash law. So it would require a lot of legwork to prepare, and I think it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of staff energy on it until we have even a straw poll or a general idea from the commission whether that's something they're interested in or not interested in. Do you want to add to that?
No, I totally agree. The only other issue is, policy direction, open space still excluded. That's not even on the table.
Right.
Yes.
So it's possible that at the next meeting, you would come back with a report and we could sound off about that issue that you just raised?
Yeah, and maybe it makes sense to push the whole thing off because with that report, we may all conclude, oh, that does it. That's good. We don't need to go further. Or we may say,
Curious, is there anyone on the commission that thinks modifying the leash law is a good idea?
I do.
I think it's an idea to I would love to have no leash law for my dog. I think it would be a very challenging policy to promote in Palo Alto.
I was just curious where.
Well, I don't think challenging should preclude you from not.
I agree.
Right, because anything worthwhile is usually hard. But yes, I
think it's a bad idea. I think it's a dodge so we don't buy. We're trying to get out of providing enough dog parks, and this is just a way of dodging the responsibility. I think we should just bite it off and put the dog parks and make them dog parks and have people parks. And
Okay.
fix the two.
We'll tackle that one again next month.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, the next one is restrooms, and again, I know that Darren has been working on this as well, so, and this is just on one slide because the policy direction is now just associated in the verbiage of what is being recommended to address the need of restrooms throughout the city, except where alternatives, adjacent buildings or public facilities exist, or site is under 1 acre. So really this starts to look at the size of the park and giving criteria to where we should have restroom facilities. And then also it looks at if other restroom facilities are around, then they one park or 1 acre size, they can be precluded if there's already facilities in adjacent.
How many parks do we have that are 1 acre or above?
So that's the process I just started,
Okay.
was seeing where we've got parks, which ones fit this criteria, how many would we need, and do they make sense? So I just went preliminarily through it last week, and I want to do that in a more robust fashion. And I think it would behoove us to have a couple commissioners join me so I can walk them through that, kind of run my thinking past them, because not all of them make sense to me. And I think it would be great to have a couple commissioners to look at that with me. I think it'd be a short-term thing. I don't think this would be like the dog parks where it goes on for such a long time. I think we could knock this out in 1 or 2 meetings.
Subcommittee.
How come everybody's hand didn't go up?
We're dealing with dog poop, we don't need to.
Well, you might as well clean the bathrooms too. It's right there.
No, let's not go crazy.
Just for our one new commissioner, I just want to point out that every time we've done an individual park review in my 6 years, it's been very controversial when we wanted to put in bathrooms where they weren't, because everybody except the people that live around there want new bathrooms, and the people that live around there don't want bathrooms. So I just want to point out this is not a non-controversial issue that, feedback comes back from the surveys and we do gung-ho. I don't have a position on that. I'm just saying that's been the past feedback we've gotten.
And why did you limit this just to restrooms? Because in the discussion that you had with the people, with the stakeholders, they talked about every park having a looped walking path or a bench or an open lawn or bunch grass or some kind of activity.
Separate.
Or some shade. And so I was just wondering why is that separate?
It's separate.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think you want to bite all those off at one time.
Why did they bunch them all together?
Well, that I think was mostly for the stakeholder conversation and so they could have an understand of, because in the stakeholder thing, it was referred to as park amenities, or it had another heading on there that then you could consider all these, and it's a reference size, but because for our discussion tonight and because of time constraints to do with it, and because the restroom of those things is definitely it ranks higher as far as a controversial thing where you get pro and con for either one, that this is the one that's definitely going to generate the most discussion, that really needs the most kind of feedback on. So I don't know if you want to go with Darren's suggestion. I don't know if there's commissioners here that want to discuss that issue more. I see a lot of excited faces.
And if not, I'm glad to do the analysis just with staff and then bring it to you and walk you through it, and I'm glad to do that.
I don't know if this one's, I mean, I think it is controversial when it comes to actually implementing it because of the local neighborhood of the park. It definitely will be an issue, but this is one where I think we heard a lot of feedback on the community. We don't want to see more restrooms.
And the council too.
Yeah, the council. Yeah. So the question for us really now is, okay, so then where and how many, and a policy that speaks to that.
Because it's not cheap either,
No.
right?
Yeah.
So, sorry, Darren, I cannot help you with this, but I would throw in my 2 cents that I think it might be worth considering some kind of usage metric for the park. So parks that get a lot of use, or that get a lot of use by young kids, might move higher on a priority list for bathroom consideration.
I had done that in my preliminary examination. For example, Esther Clark is 22 acres, but there's no amenities at all at that site. Very little use, and just didn't make sense to put a restroom. So my preliminary recommendation, that, for example, would not have one, and based on the criteria you just mentioned.
Do we know how many people visit each park?
No. The ones where we have data are Foothills Park and Baylands, where we have trail counters, official entrances, rather than porous parks where you can enter every single way. But it's not to say that we don't have, fairly reasonable anecdotal evidence we go to Magical Bridge. Well, I can tell you that's our most popular playground, and I think I can get unanimous agreement.
And the bathrooms are there.
And the bathrooms are
right
there.
there.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, it feels to me that this policy is going to be something like increase bathrooms in Palo Alto parks according to the following criteria, with staff judgment on exceptions, something like that. So, kind of.
I don't think we want a blanket statement that thou shalt put in.
Yeah.
I think thou shalt consider would be reasonable.
And that was my kickback as well to MIG when we had this discussion. I just thought that blanket statement, I can already think of several parts where that's not appropriate. And her, MIG and Lauren in particular, had said the risk you do is you weaken it and allow more flex when we come to do a restoration project at Monroe or wherever the park is that fits this 1 acre size that would normally have one. You have opened the window to say, well, I guess there's mitigating factors, let's not do one there, was MIG's concern. And I thought it was a good one to consider at least.
But there are mitigating factors if you have a 22-acre park that you say, we don't need it because nobody's here.
I agree.
All right, then the last one we have to review tonight is deals with service areas. And service areas, in the definition of that is your access to a particular amenity. So it's either, we talked about this map that I'm showing up on the screen now, which is the 1/4 and 1/2 mile distances to access each park. And this then tries to basically divvy out certain experiences and the distance that they are away as a way of then broadcasting those amenities across the system. So this deals again with more with distance, and it is adopting the following service areas as a desired maximum distance between residents' home and the nearest park or recreational facility in order of priority.
Can you switch back to the map for a second?
Sure.
A 1/4 mile is really short.
A 1/4 mile, yes. And I will preface by saying is that unlike the old school maps before, and we've talked about this before, that this map is a lot more accurate because it's actually showing how you would access the areas. So before they would just basically draw a perfect 1/4 mile circle around each park, and that would represent the 1/4 mile. But we know from accessing it that that's not the real case. So the brown then is showing the 1/4 mile, the orange is showing the 1/2 mile, and then of course the items in the white are the areas of the city that fall out of those areas.
It was also brought up that if you put more bike paths and pedestrian-friendly routes, that you could expand that 1/2 mile because it would take you less time to get there than walking the 1/2 mile or 1/4 mile.
Other comments? You're waiting.
I'll make some
I
comments.
was gonna.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so I feel that we've had a lot of feedback with regard to dog parks and 1 mile when you're going out to walk your dog, to walk round trip 2 miles to take them to a dog park without getting in a car because we want to try to discourage, and you can't put most dogs on a bike. It's too far. But we know this, that there's a shortage of dog facilities, and we'll address it. But in this particular policy, I think that's too far.
Well, the one difficult thing about that is I think that when you start to get below the 1 mile, just by looking at the map there, that you start to basically state that every park needs a dog park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
Right.
that's then where
I know.
the idea then of the 1 mile then gives you a further distribution. It's less, but at least you have them around and it's not in every park. So I think that's the kind of the real thing to look at here is that these distances definitely from the the mile below is basically, these things will probably appear at most parks, where the mile above, it's more about distribution through the system and not proximity,
And
so.
it's 1 mile or less, right? If 1 mile is the standard,
Max.
it's the max, right?
Max.
Most people are below that.
This is the one where you're just gonna have to spend 2 miles on gas. Really, because it's just the usage of, for walking the dog.
Yeah.
It is, if you wanna go to a dog park, because
Or you can imagine.
there's just not enough land to put that many dog parks in.
People do it anyway.
It's just that it's a non-starter, you just can't, you know.
I know. I just thought it.
I mean, one seemed short to me for that reason.
How many dog parks would we need if we wanted 1 mile coverage? Have we looked at that?
Well, Darren's done some heavy lifting on this. She's going to share it with the subcommittee tomorrow.
Yeah, I hadn't looked at that particular
No,
part
okay.
yet, but what I really looked at is distribution north and south.
Okay.
And it's very difficult finding these locations, so redrawing it to make sure I meet, pulling a string with a pencil to try to hit the 1 mile for every spot. I'd be glad to do it, see where we shake out.
Well-
I figured, Keith, we had
Yeah.
something like 33 neighborhood parks, somewhere around there. And they don't serve everybody with a half-mile radius. So if you took half of those, maybe are in a mile radius, or, yeah, you would need half as many to serve a mile radius, very roughly. Then you're talking about 15 dog parks.
Or should it would be square?
I know you can't, they're a little bit apples and oranges in the
Yeah.
distances.
Yeah, so even 1 mile is going to be challenging.
Yeah.
So we need to revisit this one too, as opposed to just sign off on it right now.
I don't want to sign off on it.
That's what I'm
No,
saying.
we're looking for feedback.
Yeah.
Where do you see big issues?
Yeah.
Obviously, dog park, one. But
Community
other-
garden is one that's also 1 mile is going to be challenging for that also.
Mhm.
Yeah, very.
I agree with that. I think the bottom three,
Do we
I
even want a
don't
policy
I
on
don't
this?
really want in there at all for a
Yeah.
walk shed
I think what
radius.
the consultants were saying is the pure distance to a park is not sufficient. They need more specificity about the experience that one is having at a park or can have at a park, coupled with distance, is a more meaningful
I just
policy.
think we're already struggling
Right.
to not meet the half-mile goal for for any kind of public park
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
Adding in additional requirements that we can't meet, I think is,
Yeah.
it's foolhardy.
I think dropping those last three can
And-
make some sense. Answering Rob's question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Pile on. Those dog parks, community gardens, picnickers are a very small subset of the full resident population, or at least a subset. So while you can justify it for any kind of public park near your house, it's hard to justify specialized uses that near your house consistently.
That makes sense to me. I mean,
And-
this isn't one, this, we don't have full ownership over these, is that, yeah.
What were we thinking of with play experiences? We're thinking of parklets or something, or
That would either playgrounds or like a natural play area. Yeah, there's really not like a specific, mostly playgrounds. So the playgrounds though can take on different types of things. I mean, you can have access to a creek and that could be a natural play area. So the play experience is a broad definition of being able to be outside and play. Mostly it's just to your standard playground.
we're very close
So
to a
it's
creek.
definitely not for a playground within a quarter mile of every single house.
I
Yeah,
think
you got your back.
if one of our policy points from 2 hours ago was acquisition, if we are actively looking to buy corner lot, whatever, land that comes available to the city, then that helps us achieve the goal of whatever the acreage per resident policy that we want to try to achieve. So maybe that will fulfill instead of, I think this is a very tricky policy point, the service area.
I can see what the consultant is also trying to get at here is that if you do add land, then what actually then amenities make that park usable? To the, you know, is it a playground and a place to kick a ball and a place to have a picnic and a place to sit outside on a bench
And a dog
enjoy
park.
nature and a dog park?
And
So
a field for.
it starts to,
Yeah.
they're trying to like then, you know, once you acquire that space, then what do you want to put in there? And then it also starts to speak to the size of the space, you know,
Right.
is a little parklet, do you want to spend that much amount if you're only going to get, you know, you're not going to get all these things, you're only going to get one of them to do. Is that really beneficial in the system just to add space if it's not really providing an opportunity to do things, even though it may just provide the opportunity to be outside and be surrounded by nature? So I think that's the other thing they're trying to.
Yeah, this is my personal biggest frustration, because I know, going to that city council yesterday, knowing how desperate everybody is for land, for housing, and for all kinds of services, and we're just one of those groups looking for land. You're not going to get much land, and if you're going to get land, you're going to get a tiny parcel. And how do you do this? How do you put a dog park in every one of those little parcels?
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. So if we put it in here, are we setting an unrealistic expectation? That's my biggest fear.
Yeah.
I want to be fair. I want to be fair to all the stakeholders, and there were, 12, 15 stakeholders. I want to be fair, but I don't want to set unrealistic expectations. We're not going to have 15 dog parks.
That being said, I think it's not enough to just say we want to have more community gardens and more dog parks.
Right, yeah.
I think we have to figure out a more compelling way to include it in the master plan that maybe has some.
Well, there is a step that is then beyond this, that is the next step in this process is actually creating the site-specific plans. And the site-specific plans will start to call out areas of, mostly they'll look at the park and maintain what's in the park, but then they'll start to locate a dog park or a community garden or a restroom or all those things that aren't there now to distribute them basically across. So, on that specific level, we can start to review that at the time when you have like specific parks to start looking at as far as the project goes. But so maybe there isn't the need to have a policy doing that if we set a distribution across the system with doing those specific plans. So there is another layer, I guess, of this that's going to talk about specific sites of things.
Okay. Can I just throw out one more issue around that first bullet, the public park or preserve within a half-mile, quarter-mile preferred? That is my personal preference to retain that current policy that's in the comp plan. But it has been suggested to me, and I throw this out for other folks to think about, how compelling it is, whether it makes some sense to, instead of a geographic radius, to consider somehow residential density in a certain area, so that instead of targeting your parks to where there's the gap in that quarter-mile mark, you target your parks to where more of the people are.
You're going to like
So-
some of the maps I'm going to show you in a minute.
Oh, good.
I'll just bring up the map that you're talking about. So,
Oh, okay.
This is the inverse of the quarter and a half mile map. The blue areas are the areas that are lacking park space. The little dialogue boxes that have been put up there, now you can start to see that section E has the highest population density. Section D has the highest population. Area B has the lowest population density. So I think what this is starting to tell us that if you were going to go out to acquire parkland, these would be the places you'd look. And then how we would prioritize that is by looking then at population density. So you would say that E would be your primary zone that you would start looking at first to acquire parkland, basically, in that area. So this is now starting to feed some information. You can see, though, like an area like B, that there is, and the purple little building in there is signifying a school. that maybe the tactic is, instead of trying to buy land there, is to try to form some type of better agreement with the school district that allows the use of their school grounds to be used on non-school times as a park. That would start to fulfill some of the what we want to have there. And maybe then the city and the school district works together, and the city starts to fund, maybe there's a playground that's built on the playing field that's out there to start to give it more amenities. That's then taken care of by the city, but is allowed, the community is allowed to use it as basically in a parkland. So this starts to look at basically then what you were saying is where would be the most optimal place to really actually start looking for based on population density and the lack of,
So council struggles a lot with this concept of having a minimum required acreage, or several council members feel like that's something we can't, how are we ever going to achieve that? I think it might help them retain this kind of a service area radius if it was coupled with a policy that we're with priority to the highest density areas, or something to that effect.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, one thing that bothers me though is if you're just saying by radius, that may force people to put a bunch of tiny little parks everywhere.
Right.
And is a tiny park that's a quarter mile from my house better than a bigger park half mile away? And it might be there's some critical mass that you need for a park. And if it's too small, is it usable at all?
right. Well, I think that that's what I think MIG would like to pinpoint, is that and we talked about this I think in the original matrix, is that they would like guidance from us of the amenities that we think are vital to basically make a park useful. So, and I think that is more important to us because just of the cost of land. So if you're going to buy someone's corner lot, does that make a lot of sense to do if we can't get amenities there? Then it just becomes basically a green lawn space that
Costs millions.
that doesn't have a lot of use to it. So, I think that then goes back to then what they were, they start to talk about then these things because they want to incorporate that if you're going to build a new park, then you should have at least these minimum things in it to make it usable. If you just level the house and turf the whole area, does that, it gives you a park there, but what is it actually giving you as far as the amenity goes?
Well, we can definitely take action on that.
Right.
Through one of the.
And that said, over at Fayette Park in Mountain View, they knocked down 2 houses, and that is really used. It's very popular.
Right. Well, I think though, but if you start to look at that little park, they start to cram. There's a lot of stuff in it. They got a playground going in. They got a lot of adult equipment. They got a turf area. They got the pathways, and it is a tiny little thing, but it is highly used, and it's one of the main reasons why it's highly used because it does offer the opportunity to do all these other things. So you draw in multiple user groups, which makes it a successful space instead of just basically not having anything designated to there. Like I said, mow the houses down and just plant grass. That really didn't give us what we're looking for as far as usability goes. So.
Are you talking about the one on Del Navio?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Demelli Park, yeah.
That is incredible, how busy it is.
Yes.
It just knocked down 2 little houses among huge apartment buildings with a lot of little kids.
And that's if we were, having the conversation too about the synthetic turf, that would probably be a good place to use synthetic turf. Their little grass area is so small, it just basically is beat to dirt is all it is. So that's just about preferences of how to use synthetic turf and what it's used for. Personally, I feel that if you're going to have or big open turf areas, that I think they should be turf because that's where you want to spend your money on. And if you have these little tiny spaces where the grass never lives, then that usually is a good spot for synthetic turf.
Okay. So anyway. Commissioner Henderly, was that your last point?
Yeah.
Okay. So that concludes this section unless we want to go into other things, but I'd like to get the speakers to have their comments now that we've had this. So the first speaker is Shiny Kleinhaus. 3 minutes.
It up, but I can't, I can't get it.
What do you do now?
It's not connected to the speaker system, just talking to it.
Well, it's actually, it's come undone.
I tried to get it out of the back part.
There it goes.
I have a lot of things.
I think though, does she have to hit?
No,
There is
it's
no
not.
button.
It's
No,
not.
it's just
Okay.
live.
Thank you. That was a very interesting discussion. Thank you for everything you've been talking about. I'm Shani Kleinhaus. I speak as a resident and for some of the environmental organizations, Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society and the Sierra Club. I want to say something about little parks. There is a little empty lot next to my house that had a house that burned out years ago. That place is so busy with children. There's no grass, there's no nothing. They build teepees, they're creative, they do stuff. It's the children gets there. I don't even know where they come from because we don't have that many children in our neighborhood. So little empty lot with nothing, not plastic turf, no nothing, are valuable. But this is a side. I hope I get to the things I really wanted to talk about. In the policy section, on this first slide you looked at, there was nothing about protection of nature. Commissioner Hetterly mentioned it later, but I think it needs to start from protection because somewhere resource conservation plans, such as you guys mentioned for Foothill Park and for the Baylands, does need to find their place, and they have to go all the way back to plan framework and definitions. So I found that piece was missing, just as Commissioner Hetterly expressed. I think that the issue of efficiency is also somewhat of a problem. I think it would be good to look at the Urban Forest Master Plan where they look at diversity. And diversity cannot always be efficient. You get to the lowest common denominator when you save water on everything and you don't allow a few trees with a little bit of more water in some areas. So it's good to look at heterogeneity, it's good to look at diversity and not always just try to get to the lower common denominator, which this is leading us into intentionally or unintentionally. Under goal for integrate nature, natural systems, and ecological principles throughout Palo Alto. I think that the discussions that I've been through, and I've been to every one of them, I think, people really wanted to see frogs in the parks. They wanted to see nature in terms of animals. They did not talk about sustainability so much, not that it's not important, but it wasn't the focus. The focus was preservation of nature in the parks that are outside of the urban core and some of the urban core, and integration of nature into the urban parks. And that was very, very clear in all the different meetings, and it was a high priority for people in every survey that the department, the Parks and Recreation did. So I think looking at that, from what I look at the 4 policies, first I would separate preservation from integration and kind of define where is what, and then look at the policies. And only one of them actually has to do with nature. The other ones are about access to different programs, and that's a great thing, but it doesn't belong in this. So 4A does not belong here. And 4C, D, and E are also not part of this. They're part of sustainability and other things. What should be here is really policies about integration of the Urban Forest Master Plan, about resilient ecosystem, which is a document that I just gave one of them to Peter here, and maybe that would help. So I think the protection of nature and looking at policies that actually have to do with nature is really, really important. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Madhuri.
Good evening. I'm here again. I'm sure you guys are bored of seeing me at this point, but again, I'm here to speak, to ask you for dog parks, particularly in North Palo Alto. Some of the discussion was very encouraging. To even consider 15 dog parks is I never thought I'd hear something like that. But, you know, and even I don't expect you to come up with 15 dog parks, but if you can come up with 5 or 3 more, certainly in North Palo Alto, which is north of Oregon, we would be very, very grateful. There are larger parks here that are quite underutilized, at least by the local residents, parks like Eleanor Pardee, parks like Rinconada. There is usage, but maybe it's worthwhile to see who it is that's using it. Not that I have any problems with anybody else. I just want a place to take my dog to play. I and lots of other people in Crescent Park. And also Heritage Park, while it's very used, there is the area behind the museum, between the museum and the apartments, that nobody uses. It's shaded, there's no sun there, it's just empty. All we need is a fence and a gate and a trash can. But please do something about this. We would really like you to make some progress and put in a few dog parks this side of the town. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll do a status and process check. If people are motivated to go on with more policy debates, we can pick a couple more if they're hot buttons. Or we can do what we had talked about of just kind of give feedback on all of these and then pick it up at the next meeting after you do the rev. Any views?
I think I would prefer the feedback. Do we have time to go through what the slides on the survey? The survey results.
We do. They're preliminary, and so we don't want to
Even,
spend a lot of time.
yeah,
on
but
that.
even if it's like 5-10 minutes, I think
Yeah.
it'd be useful to at least see a first peek at that. I think that might be more fruitful than going over more policies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And you've got those slides?
Yes.
Okay.
And I
Great.
will just, there was one last slide as far as next steps go. So next time we will again focus on the policies again and the revisions, the minor revisions to the goals. We will also be looking at a master plan outline next time. So those are basically for next meeting. And just the general overall is that we're going to be doing a city council study session in May. Review of the draft plan in the summer and then approval of the plan in the fall is the general schedule for the master plan. And we'll just quickly go through the 3 maps then that were put together, these concept maps. The first one we already discussed, which is basically the park search areas, which have basically the second slide of that, which is the same slide, starts to talk about the density of the specific areas and the areas that we would want to concentrate on first as far as the park acquisition goes. So that is the search area plan. The next 2 plans then, which do reflect each other, the purple line is plan is basically talking about the connections or pathways between the parks to start to create the linking to them. So if you wanted to expand the park system by making the link or access to them easier and more connected, then these would be basically the pathways that we would look at to do that. The path from west to east, basically from the Baylands to the Ridge Trails are those trails basically the Beta Ridge Trail system that is already currently established by our transportation plan, using basically as the east-west axis, and then the north-south axis are looking at our transportation plan and our bike plan and using basically those connections there. I will say that in the meeting with the stakeholders that pathway number 1 right now is following Halper. The actual bike route is Bryant, so we are going to make a modification to the plan and move pathway 1 over a couple blocks to align with the bike pathway there. The third plan is referred to as a pollinator trail. This mostly though talks about a habitat and linking habitat and creating the links there. Again, it follows though the same pathways that are called out on the previous plan. These pathways do connect the parks together in a more linear way and expands the system in that respect. So these would be, if you were going to enhance these pathways in the future, then what this plan is also proposing is that incorporating nature, whatever that would be, either patches of milkweed for butterflies, or you plant oak trees just along these to create a natural canopy habitat that would go throughout the city. This is something that really has never been done as far as a master plan goes, as far as making recommendations like this, so it is kind of a cutting edge thing. The other things that are interesting to look at on this plan is that the tan areas are the areas in the urban forest master plan that designate where our urban forest is, I guess, has the least amount of coverage. It's just basically looking kind of those environmental factors that can be used then to link then the habitat corridors together. So all these are just kind of concept plans. Further discussion can be had. You can also see that which Rob will probably cringe that I'm bringing this up, but there is a 3-foot rise of the water line there in the city. So, for our purposes, if you were going to build yourself a gymnasium or a pool or a community center one day, then that line would probably mean something to you as far as building an amenity like that would cost a lot, that maybe it wouldn't be in that area where it is projected a 3-foot ocean rise.
So where's that one?
That's
See the
pink
dotted,
line.
all that's going to be
Okay.
underwater, is
Yeah.
basically what it's saying.
There's a lot of houses in that area.
Well, I can't say that the water is going to get to
I'll
that
have
point. I'm sure that
beachfront
we will try our hardest to make it stop doing that. But again, if you were going to invest millions of dollars in a building over a long period of time, that maybe the other areas of town would behoove you to consider other than that.
A lot of water hazards on that new golf course.
Well, you could be like the Netherlands and build proper dike system.
There you go.
Which I think
Okay.
that is actually something that is being considered right now by the joint powers, actually.
As long as they look at the Netherlands
Yeah.
versus
Build
New
a
Orleans.
levee all around it.
Survey.
The golf course has enough that even if we had 3-foot rise, that the golf course would not be underwater? We put enough dirt on there?
One length of period, are we talking about? I mean,
Is it?
for the next 100 years?
No.
Or what,
I mean, what is the minimum elevation of any part of the golf course after the renovation?
Oh, I'd have to look at the maps. It's several feet. That's all right. Well, no, that's not actually true. There's still some wetland areas, right, that will be very low, actually.
More critical is the levees adjacent to that, stopping the water from the creeks coming in, which are robust and high.
Okay.
Will be.
And yeah. More so once the JPA finishes their project.
Make sure
Okay.
the bikeway thing that you have, the San Francisco Bay Trail and the Stanford Perimeter Path, as well as Brian.
Yes, that was brought up in the stakeholder meeting, so MIG is working on adding a few more paths that aren't designated on this. So Bay Trail is definitely one of the main ones. All right, the final thing that we have to look at tonight is just the preliminary results of the online challenge. It did close a few Fridays ago. In association with that, we did have the community meeting with that as well, that provided the opportunity for people to come out to do the survey if they did not want to do it online. But as we alluded to before, it seems that most people just did take it online and didn't really come to our community meeting. Of the 731 respondents, it broke down in this way. So 605 of those were from Palo Alto. So it definitely, I think, captures the community at hand as far as the responses go. And then it other results of the 46 live in nearby communities, 9 describe themselves as visitors, 48 own a business in Palo Alto, and 223 of those also work in Palo Alto. So that was kind of the breakdown of the demographics of those that did do the survey. Of course, the survey was broken into the 12 areas of focus, divided into the 3 elements of the plan, which were the parks, trails, open space, the recreational facilities, and the recreational programs. In the survey, you have all taken it and looked at it. You were asked to divvy up dollars between each of those three and then do a final one that basically brought the whole list together. In the bar graphs that I'm going to show you next, it's basically gives three pieces of information. The first line item is the average allotment of dollars, so who got the most dollars for which line item. The second one is what the percentage was of people that did the survey that used $2 or more on a specific thing. And then the final one is the tally of who of the people that allocated money, they didn't allocate anything for that specific thing. So and you can see things like the dog park number 5 there. Basically, you can see that 16% of those put multiple allotment of money, $2 or more on it, but 66% of the people taking the survey didn't put any money on that. So, which basically then denotes or starts to tell you information that there's a organized, passionate group that will definitely spend that on there, and then the general population, don't think that that's a big deal, so they didn't put any money towards it at all. The list then here, so this one is the parks, trails, and open space. It had the 7 areas of focus that were reviewed, and this is how it ranked. So the first one was the enhancing comfort and making parks more welcoming. Integrating nature into parks was number 2. Number 3 was distributing park activities and experience across the city. 4 is expanding the system. 5, improving spaces and increased options for off-leash dog parks. 6 was increase the variety of things to do in the existing parks. And 7 was improving the accessibility for the full range of park and recreation opportunities. These are ranked per the percentage of the first line. So if they've got the most money out of the full group, then that's how they were ranked per this. Then it goes through the next 2 elements. This one is the recreation facilities, so improving and enhancing community centers, ranked high. Enhancing capacity and quality of sports fields was number 2. Distributing park and recreation activities and experiences across the city is number 3. Number 4, improving spaces, increase options for off-leash dog parks, increase the variety of things to do in existing parks, number 5. Number 6, increasing health and wellness opportunities in parks, and number 7, improving the accessibility of full range of park and recreation opportunities. Of course, a few of the areas of focus came up in multiple ones of these, so the dog park one as well as the accessibility. There was further discussion in the stakeholder meeting because the word definitely accessibility gets applied, or people have the feeling of being inclusive or for allowing access to those that have disability or can't access to those, but it also, in our sense, is talking about economics and being able to afford things, actually being able to physically access the parks as well. So it has a lot of meanings that go along with it that I wanted to bring up because there was a lot of focus on that in the stakeholder meeting, because it was felt that it was just talking about basically ADA and accessibility for that, which this doesn't quite do. And people were concerned that it was ranking last in these. Recreation program was the 3rd area that came in the survey. And to run through the 6 there, the improving and enhancing community centers and recreation, again, was one that showed up in the facilities as well. So that is seen by the community as being a high priority. The interesting part to look at there is that the community does have a good grasp on that. That 28% or 37% put they allocated multiple dollars on it because they understand that that's going to be an expensive endeavor. So it's good to see that there is kind of that general idea that this thing is going to cost more, so people will put more money on it, but they do care about that and would like to see enhancement of community centers in the system itself. Exploring new types of programs and events was number 2. Offering more of existing programs and classes, number 3. Distribution of park and recreation activities and experiences across the system. Number 4 and number 5 is increased health and wellness opportunities in parks and programs, and number 6 is improving the accessibility, again, very similar to how it ranked in the one before. Of course, the interesting part of this then is then looking at the whole list together. So the list then is broken into these two slides. So basically, when you look at, these are the top 6 things of all 12 areas of focus that were giving allocations of the money to. So for the purpose of the whole list, integrating nature into Palo Alto parks was actually the #1 thing that they got the most money allocated for it. #2, improving and enhancing community centers. #3, improving spaces and increase opportunities for off-lead dog parks. #4 is enhance comfort and making parks more welcoming. #5, just distributing park activities and experience across the city. And #6, expanding the system. MIG also felt that #7 was kind of fits in the top grouping. They basically described this as you have a top group and a lower group. They felt that #7 was in the upper group as well, even though that the slide itself is showing it in the bottom group here, but you can see that there is then, as far as the percentage goes, from 11 till 9 is pretty close, and then you have a definitive drop off from 7 till 5, basically. So that's then how the community then ranked the priority of spending or allocating dollars to these areas of focus. Besides breaking it down in the 2 ways that they are also putting a full summary together of the survey that we'll have for next meeting and talk about this list more and how it breaks out more. So I don't know if there's any more conversations or questions about that.
Anybody just want to make any random comments?
I'm surprised how tight it is. It really is. Like this last 12, the worst is 5 and the best is 11. They're all are pretty clustered. And it's just not people spreading it evenly among all the projects, because on the right, there's a lot of people putting zeros on these things.
I'm surprised at how high more capacity ranks, more parklands. I mean, I guess it's easy to, if you're only voting with $2 as opposed to the 20 million a year it would take, but but there was a lot of support for it. Let's get even more.
Yeah, if I can do that for $5.
That's right.
And I think the top 6 are in pretty good alignment with what we've heard from every other source, right? That's,
I think from the preliminary
they seem
summary
to mean
is
what
that,
they
yes.
say.
Right.
And Fields didn't make the top 6 except for Mig's comment that it was kind of tied for 6.
Right. And it's basically on the border of the lower group, really.
Right.
So.
And as we expected, there was a little bit of, I don't say this unfairly, but a little bit of a stuffing the ballot box by interest groups, which is what we would expect, so there's no problem with that.
Well, and I think that's why they were trying to show then, like, who put multiple dollars towards one thing and who didn't put any, so you could see that
very helpful
there was
stats.
like
Very
a
helpful.
specific group that was then more interested in that. So, but again, there will be a full summary for the next meeting about this.
Great.
But we did want to show you or reveal what the kind of the early findings were, because I think they are interesting just to look at too.
Yeah.
Bolster what I think we kind of rank these out as.
All right. Thank you, Peter and staff. And we'll go on to the next item, which is any comments and announcements?
I just wanted to hand out a flyer for Coverly Day, which is coming up on March 19th at Coverly Community Center. And what this does is it brings all of the different groups that are behind, the doors, working in their different rooms out into the open, and there's the community can come and see what they do. They can show off their work that they do. There'll be performances, there'll be artists there, so I encourage everyone to attend. There will also be a very short sort of activity that will be asking people who come what their vision is for, not necessarily their vision, but what does Cubberley mean to them and what they think Cubberley could be and where do they think it could, eventually be in the future. So that will be part of it as well.
What's the date again?
March 19th, I'll hand these out.
Can you send us an email?
I can, sure.
Because I'd like to pass it around to all my emails.
Yeah, that would be great.
Do you have others?
No, that's it.
Rob, golf course update?
Well, we do have, Kristen had an interesting meeting in Darren, with Fish and Wildlife staff to look at, well, why don't you explain it?
Sure. So city staff, which included community services and public works, and our biological consultants met with Fish and Wildlife Service and the Army Corps of Engineers at the golf course. The purpose of the meeting was for Fish and Wildlife Service to look at the different wetland areas and try to make a decision if they feel salt marsh harvest mouse could be present on the golf course. And the reason they need to make that decision is it will determine which route they go as far as permitting. One route, which is an informal consultation, could take a few months, and another route, which is a formal consultation, could take much longer. They didn't make a decision there. They're going to go back and discuss it and talk with their supervisors, and then they need to provide their opinion, it's the biological opinion, or to the Army Corps of Engineers, and then the Corps will either have to continue working with Fish and Wildlife Service, or they could issue us the permit. So we're sort of still in limbo a little bit. We feel like the meeting went well, but we really didn't get a read from them on where they were headed. So we should know which direction they're headed in a couple weeks.
A couple weeks more of analysis and discussion?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is this mouse endangered, or is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that mouse has never been sighted out
Hopefully
there,
you can swim.
right?
Swim out last month.
Rob, didn't you say there's no, the mouse has never been sighted out there?
I have, that's what I've heard. But Darren would
I don't know.
be better.
Yeah, and part of it's not just that there may not be a sighting there, but they do look at dispersal distance, so how far is the closest sighting from the golf course, and is it likely that the mouse could travel from that location to the golf course? Are there barriers? So they look at a lot of different things.
And this is directly related to the golf course as opposed to the water project?
Correct.
So they're at least looking at our project, which is a
Yeah.
big step. I did want to mention, we didn't talk about the ad hoc committees. I don't know if there is an update, but I think we jumped straight from.
Oh, we did, yes, it's small print. Well, we were gonna talk about dog parks,
Yeah.
but he kind of handled that, but if you guys have something else you want to
No,
add.
that was it. We were just going to explain the new process.
Okay. No other announcements? Then we want to take a look at the agenda for the March 22nd meeting. One is more of these policies, which we've discussed. Is the zoo going to be ready to come back?
Might be, they've got a new design. I'm eager to see it. I haven't yet. They're going to look at it with their board, the Friends board, in the next couple of weeks. So it might be ready. I hope it is. I'd like to see it come back, particularly if it's different.
Yeah.
But so we're pushing that along. If it's ready, we'll bring it.
Okay. And wasn't there also a project to come back to us with signage or boardwalk or?
The Balin's Boardwalk project will be coming back next month.
Okay.
That'll be Public Works presenting that.
Does the existing ad hoc committee with, I don't know if it's an agenda, but the existing ad hoc committee for the parks plan, in its purview, can discuss the policies and our next revision?
I think
I
we
think it
left it
does, right?
open-ended.
That's
Yeah.
what I thought. Oh, that'd be good, because we might want to get together before next meeting.
But if we do that, we should do it well before the next meeting.
Yeah.
It was kind of really short
Right.
time frame this last time.
I hope to have a Cubberley update next month or now or whenever it's convenient for you. What's the status of
I can tell you, the Kimberly Day is an important, a little bit of a milestone event. What's going to happen before that, actually, there'll be a press release. I believe it's currently planned for March 9th with City Manager Jim Kane and Superintendent Max McGee, who have both written what they're calling a compact to make progress on the master planning process this year and move along. So that's it's been drafted and that's being planned, and then we really get much more serious about the process of master planning that side. What is that going to be? What is that going to look like? And how is the public going to be included? And how are we going to build on the work of the CCAC? There'll be some activity in March, that compact and Coverly Community Day.
Okay. And just for a moment, back on this, this policies, our assignment is now with the draft that we have to give feedback to you, directly to you?
Yeah, it's Catherine and I.
Okay, great. And so can you guys communicate with the two missing commissioners that that's the assignment, so we get that?
Now 3.
Now 3, yeah. Okay.
And just go policy by policy.
Yeah.
By item.
And say, some of them might not be policies, but just say not a policy or whatever.
Right. You're going to have to rewrite.
Just, thumbs up.
Okay, anything else? Motion for adjournment?
I so move.
Okay.
I second.
Second by Abby, all in favor? The 4 of us that are left, the 4 diehards, approve.
I had just 4 of us.
Jennifer and I should sleep here because we have a meeting with Darren in 12 hours
Uh-oh.
exactly. He left.
How do you like that chair? Is it nice and comfy?
Oh my God, so
Quorum is
well, it'll be
full,
in
right?
his.
Yeah.